Hey! Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or whenever this finds you. I'm your host Chantal, and thank you for joining me on another episode of To Be Confirmed, the latest, hottest podcast series which seeks to answer society's larger questions about race and racism, because often the answer to these questions remain, well, to be confirmed. Tune in, listen, and prepare to be inspired, provoked, and moved as we dive into another episode of To Be Confirmed.
Hi everyone. Long time no see. It's been a while, hasn't it? Anyways, for those of you that are just starting your journey with To Be Confirmed, welcome. Hi, if you're a frequent listener, welcome back. My name is Chantal. I'm the host and creator of To Be Confirmed, the hottest and latest podcast series which seeks to answer society's larger questions about race and racism with gender, politics and society, because more than often, the answer to those questions remain, well, to be confirmed. Now, I want to issue a little disclaimer because we're going to go through a beast of an episode today. You can see our special guest right here. We'll be introducing her in just a moment. But the disclaimer goes as follows. So, this is my legal official speak lawyer hat coming on. So, the views, information, or opinions expressed during this podcast episode are solely those of the they belong to the individuals that are involved in this podcast episode and do not necessarily represent any other entity. This podcast episode, including the information shared and our analysis of the information shared, is solely for educational purposes. Also, in shorter words, I said what I said. This is my show, my platform, my podcast, and quite frankly, I say this all the time in my work, I like to provoke thought, conversation, and racists. And if I've provoked you in any kind of way, I'm happy with that. So without further ado, I would like to direct our attention to our wonderful special guest here, which is Kadra Abdinasir. So, side note, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, that's fine. Perfect.
Fabulous. Oh my God, I was about to be like, I got that so wrong. Okay, fabulous. Side note, folks, please take the time to know people's names. Get the pronunciation right, phonetic spellings. It makes a whole difference. So, Kadra, I've been talking for a while. Please let the people know, let the world know. Tell us about you, who you are, where you're from, star sign, everything.
Thank you, Chantal. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of the pod. You're doing amazing work. So, it's been a pleasure planning this session today with you. So I'm Kadra Abdinasir. I work for a charity called Centre for Mental Health. We're a mental health research charity with a specific focus and lens around social justice. So for us, we kind of look at the drivers of poor mental health, like racism, poverty, poor housing, and see those as health interventions basically for people. So that's what I do. I've worked in the sort of charity sector for over a decade now, which is...
Wow.
Yeah, and mostly worked with children and young people and trying to improve policies around them. In terms of star signs, I'm an Aries. I don't know what my sun and moon is because I don't think my mum can actually remember
what
time she gave birth to me.
You're an Aries. I love Aries.
I know. I was a cesarean, so I don't even think she knows.
Oh, bless.
To be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, fire signs out there. If you are part of the Aries gang, please let us know. Oh my God, you're an Aries. My editor, Francesco, he's also an Aries. My best friend is also an Aries. Aries, I feel like they're wonderful folks. Fire signs are great folks. But let's not bore you with the semantics. Also, representation, who you rep in, north, south, east, west.
South London.
South London.
Yes, even though we're in North London today, it's a light journey getting here, but we need it.
Yeah, fair. But thank you so much. So a little bit of a backstory between how Kadra and I met. We met at a panel, I believe last year. It was for a law firm, talking about, a little bit about what the episode is today around children's safeguarding and adding that sort of intersectional lens on race and how it affects, children from different ethnic backgrounds. And literally from the minute I met Kadra, it was just, I don't know, it was just sort of, when you click with someone, it just happens. That was it really. And the way my hair is all everywhere, Anyways, the way we clicked was just absolutely, for me, like amazing. I think it's very rare to find that kind of connection with people. So, and we've worked together on several projects together. So I just thought, you know, I need her on this platform. I need the world to see her on this podcast. And yeah, here we are.
I know. We picked up on bad vibes that day together. We were just like so in sync. So
no, literally.
I was just like, okay, you spoiled that too. Okay.
You're coming home with me, literally.
No comment.
Yeah, I was about to say something, but I don't know if that's going to be sensible.
No comment. No comment.
No comment. We'll keep it stepping. The title of this episode is called Black Youth: Innocence, Instinct and Independence. For those of us watching on this episode, you'll see all of the information presented on the screen here. But for those of us listening, this is what we'll be talking about. Now, in the tradition of the podcast, in line with the title, we'll have an original question, which will dictate the whole conversation, the mini questions in between it. And of course, under the premise of the podcast, we'll be seeing if, in essence, the answer to the question can be confirmed. So the question in question is, the lived experiences of racism and the representation of Black youths mean that they're stripped of their innocence prematurely and their true social economic independence, which can mean that their instincts are survival in a fundamentally racist, heteropatriarchal world. How can we truly protect the independence of Black youth? That's the question for today. So pretty hefty, pretty beefy, but buckle in. I promise you, you will not want to miss this. So just to sort of clarify the direction of this episode, I'll be, when I'm talking about innocence, instinct and independence, I'll be using the definitions as shown by Cambridge Dictionary. So for innocence, it is defined as the fact that someone is not guilty of a crime. So that's the first definition. The second definition is the quality of not having much experience of life and not knowing about the bad things that can happen in life. Now, this is what I mean when I say innocence in the context of the podcast. Instinct, defined by Cambridge Dictionary, is the way that people or animals naturally react or behave without having to think or learn about it. And finally, independence, as defined by Cambridge Dictionary, is 1, the freedom from being governed or ruled by another country, and 2, the ability to live your life without being helped or influenced by other people. Again, when I say independence, that's what I mean in the context of this episode. So, Kadra, what feelings, thoughts, emotions come to you when you hear and see the title, Innocence, Instinct and Independence?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in relation to Black children, which is what we're here to talk about today, I guess it will evoke like feelings of sadness overall. Because obviously many Black children still till this day are like robbed of their innocence, right? Either because they're not seen as like children or protected in that sense, but also they're much more likely to like face lots of different hardships that make them in some ways maybe mature a bit earlier, right, than they should. Instincts, I would say that, innately, it's like we're in fight or flight mode, and we'll unpack a bit of that a bit more.
Of course,
So that's the instinct, is always maybe to be defensive because we've lived in a system that's like oppressed us for so many years and all of these things. Independence, I would say, is a bit of like a double-edged sword for me because, again, where you're robbed of your innocence, you're kind of seen as like you can fend for yourself and do stuff for yourself. But then at the same time, obviously with high levels of like incarceration or detention, they don't have independence.
No.
But also Black children, and I would say children and young people overall, don't really have a voice in our society. They're kind of like second-class citizens, to be honest with you.
It's true.
And then you can imagine if you come from like a Black background or any other background, it's even more harder for you to like be heard. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. But I guess that being said, they can have positive connotations, all three of those words, if we wanted them to. Like if we nurture them and protect the children, put in place those right sort of like scaffolding around them as like communities and institutions.
Of course.
They don't have to be negative. So
that's a good point. Thank you for that, Kadra. I think for me personally, when I think about the episode, I mean, kind of following, in a literal sense, I was following the sort of formula that I did with my podcast, premiere episode with Kettle, which was alliteration, Sounds nice, power of 3. But similar to what you were sort of describing, really, I really wanted to identify, because the words that came to me were also things that I just thought were just intrinsic to the Black experience. And I really wanted, I hope after the end of this episode that it is, but I wanted this space to be a place where we can really challenge the definitions of these words and how they apply to us as Black youth, really. So those are really my feelings in that. Also, final clarification. So when I say youth, the Office of National Statistics classify youth as being between 13 and 29. And also YouGov UK also share the same classification as well. So I guess the the first question to sort of answer the big question really is, the role of culture is so significant for us in the Black community. And importantly, for Black youth, as it's a staple for our identities, really. In what ways do you feel that the role of culture for Black youth has been neglected by our UK institutions?
Yeah, I would say neglected, but also even threatened, undermined, suppressed in so many ways. So I can kind of share some examples in my experience in how that happens in different institutions. So like in educational settings, for example, one of my friends, Warda Farah, who I'm actually seeing later, has done lots of work on like linguistic discrimination, for example. So, school settings typically don't really promote native or mother tongue languages. Black young people if they come from a country that has another language, for example. So they're sort of taught to suppress that. But even being like descendants of migrants who live in the UK, we have our own colloquialisms, our own slangs, all of these things that for some reason are like deemed as like lesser than in comparison to like white working class people who may have their own slang and all of that. That's acceptable in school settings. So there's all that kind of stuff. And even one school in South London, which my brother used to go to actually before, they introduced a no slang policy like school-wide.
You're joking?
Right?
No slang?
And they even said you're not allowed to use filler words in the classroom and stuff like that. And I'm like, how many times am I saying I'm in this podcast?
Literally. What?
You can kind of see that. And then hairstyles, for example.
Oh my God.
So we already know all these like rules that is about like based on very Eurocentric standards of what's right in culture. Obviously, again, we know that the curriculum's not really fit for purpose.
I've got some thoughts on that.
It's not diverse. Young people from Black and other backgrounds don't really see themselves represented. And then I guess, Black children in particular, they're much more likely to go to schools that are in deprived areas and communities where there's less budgets even available to support like extracurricular or cultural activities. So they just miss out on any of those things altogether unless there's like a local charity around. So for example, in Lambeth, we've got Poetic Unity, who are an amazing organization who work with like Black children around poetry, for example. And then obviously we know criminal justice system, like Black young people being over-policed and underprotected. We already know what that means. Like they kind of see Black culture and like grime music, hip-hop.
It's equivalent to criminalism.
Exactly. So that's, a very punitive response. And then in the world of work as well. So, Black young people in particular find it difficult to get jobs. Names like mine, for example, that people can't be bothered to pronounce and all that. I know we're making like some progress to have like blind recruitment processes and stuff like that, or name blind. Probably an ableist term actually, which I shouldn't use.
It is an ableist term, and
we should eradicate. But a term to say that basically people can apply anonymously and they create codes and stuff like that.
Though,
but it shouldn't take that. Like I think people should make an effort to kind of learn people's names. So all those microaggressions that happen throughout, or even macroaggressions for all these institutions are basically an attack on culture is the way I see it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so much that you've picked up on. Even with the blind recruitment piece, like as you were talking, I was like, why in the world where we're already scared of a takeover by robots, why is it that people need to rely on software to not use their own biases when trying to, support people and trying to access employment? Like that's absolutely, like, it's so wrong. Like we say all the time, like educate yourself. We say all the time, like, information's out there. But it's like, if you're not even bothered to access information and you're literally using software that's hiding names so that you're not enacting on these biases, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. But to add on to a couple of your points, I mean, there's a couple of bits that I thought about in regards to the role of culture and representation. So, and in turning it on its head and looking at the power of positive representation, positive representation, of course, allows us to see our vast and diverse diaspora. I feel like people say it all the time, but it needs to be said again. Black people aren't a monolith, we all have our different identities, different cultures and backgrounds and lived experiences, and having that positive representation that incorporates that level of intersectionality, I think, is quite validating. Even though as a population we account for less than 10% of the UK population, we're still pretty significant, and our voices clearly are loud enough that they want to suppress it. But I digress. So in the case of Notting Hill Carnival, for example, that was 2 weeks ago now. Mm-hmm. How was your Notting Hill Carnival experience?
Yeah, I went for the first time in such a long time.
First time? Okay.
Yeah, but I don't do well in big crowds, to be honest.
Okay, fair.
But yeah.
Fair.
So.
Okay, fair.
But it was nice. It was good. It's a good celebration. And obviously, typical kind of like right-wing media talking about all the negative stuff and the negative connotations rather than the positive side of things. Or even how it tied into like the justice campaign for Grenfell, for example. There's so many things that, Carnival represents to different communities and different people. So, I definitely agree.
Yeah. I did Dati Mass on the Sunday, which is basically Caribbean folks, please put in the comment section what it means to you. But from what I was taught, Dati Mass on the Sunday is where you get as dirty as possible, so paints, oils and all of that. And it's a very significant Caribbean tradition, really, to sort of mark the way that Caribbeans, when they were being colonized, that they would cover themselves in paint and tar to hide themselves from colonizers. And also it's a really great, from what I understand of it, like a great expression of rebellion, of resistance. And being in that, knowing the history of that and being in that on the Sunday was amazing. Monday, I went too late, but had a fun time on both days. It was a bit busy, in fact. Of course, it's Carnival, but had a great time nonetheless. But before we go off topic, with Carnival being Europe's second largest carnival, and of course to celebrate Caribbean culture in the UK, and in a post-Windrush country, which UK government, give them their compensation.
Please, quickly.
Okay? Quickly. Talking about representation, the over-policing of Notting Hill Carnival, you mentioned just now the way that they're reporting about it on the news, especially with the anti-Black rhetoric of criminalising Notting Hill Carnival. So, for example, you'll see a lot of like stats being thrown around. And I got these from London Live. So according to the Metropolitan Police, 300 arrests were made at 2023 Notting Hill Carnival. And once broken down by London Live, that the 308 arrests is equivalent to 1.54 arrests per 10,000 people, and over 2 million people as an average number were present at Carnival. Now, in that same weekend, Creamfields Festival was going on. That's like another music festival that happens in Cheshire. Now, there were 118 arrests. However, that is equivalent to 1.64 arrests per 10,000 people. In the stat that I gathered from this source, they did a comparison between Glastonbury to give more of like an accurate representation of, I guess some of the messaging behind both festivals. With Glastonbury, with over 210,000 people in attendance, there were only 36 arrests, which on paper, great, fantastic. You don't really want to have arrests. But when they broke it down, in comparison to Notting Hill Carnival with 1.54 arrests per 10,000 people, Glastonbury had 1.71 arrests per 10,000 people, which again, of course not going to, populate that and put that in the mainstream news, but that's one way that representation is sort of hidden from, not hidden, is used as a tactic to weaponize blackness as something that is inherently bad, for instance. Another example, representation in the media. Top Boy. Have you seen Top Boy?
No, I'm saving that for the weekend.
Oh, okay. Okay. Top Boy, I've seen it, so I'm not going to spoil it for you. But I don't know how I had the time to do it, but I saw Top Boy.
I've been avoiding Twitter and everything.
Please do, because they're throwing out the spoilers.
All the analysis.
Oh my gosh. But Top Boy, that's one part of representation of Black British culture that I see in the UK, something that is really significant. So for those across the pond, Top Boy, formerly known as Top Boy Summer House, is, in my opinion, an incredible TV series. And I, like I said, a staple in the Black British culture. And as a TV series, even though they feature fictional characters, the show itself presents such a great social commentary on, the way that Black people, especially in deprived neighborhoods, are treated, and also, their journeys in their own lives, whether that be if they choose to go through the crime pathway, you see what led them to get to that, which is the social and economic decline of their own worlds. You also see a lot of commentary on immigration, on class, so schooling, employment, and you also see a lot about community. There's a really powerful message of community throughout the entirety of that series, and also quite aptly the way that the police treat young Black people in that TV series. And of course, it features some of the biggest legends in the game, Ashley Walters and Kano. Again, for those of us that have seen Top Boy, incredible performances all round. Kudos to you, like just in awe. In saying that with representation, Ashley Walters has admitted, I got this from the Independent, he said that because Top Boy was written by a white writer, that it would have been ideal for Top Boy to be written by a Black writer. However, his view was that in understanding, him understanding the people that he consulted for the script writing was, key. Ashley Walters says that, while the show may have not been great for Ronan as a white writer on the series, Ronan Bennett, I should have put his full name in the beginning, that the show was huge for people like him. And that, of course, it was, for him, it was amazing seeing Black writers being championed on stage. And, he also referenced that it's a fight to get that diversity, to get that representation on screen. So that's incredible. If you want to talk about another piece of representation, gigs, talking the hardest, I feel like
national anthem.
I was about to say that. We say it is the official British national anthem. And when you, please, if I had the song here, I'd be going wild. What? Reload it.
And he performed it at Carnival. I missed that.
I wish I saw him. Gutted. But yeah, no, even with that, the fact that we as Black British people say the national anthem and we know the history of the national anthem of the colonial empire, I think that's incredible in itself. But just to end on this kind of note, really, because I feel like I could talk about representation for ages and ages. There is a poem that I found by Henry of Who We Be podcast and spoken word artist Telexia Iniko. They say in the poem, it's an ode to Black British youth, and basically just talks about, the power of our Black British culture. And their quote, actually, which they say, "The culture is something that should never die." And I hope for everyone that's listening in that identifies as Black British, that we do keep that culture going and moving, really. Talking on representation, LGBTQ plus representation, I am a very proud queer woman. And especially for the Black community, I feel like it'd be wrong for me to not mention Beyonce's Renaissance album. She's currently on tour at the moment, and we've seen so much discourse online about, the visibility that the Renaissance album gives in terms of, it's been likened, to an ode, as a love letter to Black queer folk, to Black folk as a whole, but also affirming and touching on, the history of certain musical genres such as house. House is a Black genre. So once you're hearing a couple of the commercial don't forget that a Black person started that, okay? But with that being said, her tour's going on. I unfortunately missed it. I'm fuming. I tried 5 times to get the tickets. I couldn't get them.
Lucky to get a friend. Yeah. Wow. It was an experience.
Yeah. I want to cry. I want to, seeing all those videos, I got so much FOMO.
Put it out there. You'll get to see her one day.
Amen.
Soon,
I receive it. But even so as well, actually, one thing I forgot to mention is that with Beyonce's album, I feel like it's such a testament to self-expression as well. Seeing the concert culture, the input on people's outfits. I went to a Beyonce after party and the disco ball hat. I bought the ingredients and I made that from scratch, and I felt so accomplished and felt so included. And again, to feel so seen by someone that looks like us, someone that champions us, was just incredible.
And she boosted the economy worldwide.
Do you know what I mean?
Incredible.
And they had the audacity to give the Grammy to somebody else. To somebody else. Anyways, let's not get into that.
Let's not.
But talking locally about LGBTQ plus representation, we see that in the UK that LGBTQ plus lives are at risk. We're seeing the government issue policies against gender affirming healthcare and also recognition of LGBTQ plus people. And in that being said, I feel that, again, Beyonce's Renaissance album, having that positive representation, those little bits and tips that we've just spoken about here, allows us to have that, I guess, that, 2-minute breather, that, okay, shit's going on outside and everything's kind of stacked up against us, but we have these moments of joy that we have the right to access. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So my next question, my love, is in your professional experience, can you share some of your observations and evidence in the disparity in mental health outcomes for Black youth? We'll start with that first, then we'll go wider.
Yeah, big question. I mean, in short, we actually don't really have good enough evidence in the UK about Black young people's experiences
researching was
of
hard
anything, pretty much, let alone like their experiences of racism. So like we have to draw on a lot of like international research and stuff like that. But their experiences of like racism isn't that much different from adults either. So, we always say that racism is toxic to mental health, and actually research, although there's so many like huge disparities, racial disparities in physical health. And we're focusing on that, like things like maternal health outcomes, for example, for Black women. The research apparently shows that racism is twice as likely to impact your mental health than your physical health.
Wow.
Which again, like mental health is often like, is described as like the Cinderella illness that's like hidden, that you don't really see, often. But we know that for children and for adults who experience it, it's been like linked to both short and longer term mental health problems such as anxiety and depression.
Wow.
And Ghislaine Kinawani, who's done some amazing work about like racial trauma, especially. And she's like trying to push this as like a concept and generate a greater understanding of this. But experiencing racism has like a bit, they call it like a weathering effect. It kind of like chips at your like self-esteem and your well-being over time.
It does.
And erodes your mental health. And so we should kind of see experiencing things like that, things like direct or indirect forms of like racism and abuse, as similar to being experiencing PTSD, right? Like people show kind of similar scores to that.
It's true.
And like I said, overall, it just impacts your well-being too, your self-esteem if you don't see yourself reflected or valued in society. And then like body confidence and your appearance as well, especially for girls when we think about standards. That. It's kind of interesting because when we look at research on like well-being in the UK specifically, it shows like Black girls have like the highest levels of body confidence and self-image.
So
and I'm just like, I find that quite interesting because I'm like, if I don't see myself represented in on TV, in adverts and everything, we're not the beauty standard. So how, like, are we just not responding to those surveys in the way, because our parents gas us up as well, don't they? They're just like, you are beautiful, you are this. And maybe, and where we hang around with each other predominantly within our communities, maybe those are affirming spaces which should be protected, which they are.
Yeah.
But overall, like comparing yourself to what is the standard.
It's mad. But even as you're saying that, like I'm thinking about like schools, because the whole body confidence thing. I remember back in the day, and I'm only 25, but back in the day where like, having big lips, big tits, a bum, hips, that was all like, oh, you're fat, you're this, you're that. Yeah. And now what? Nearly, I don't want to... Everybody is seemingly getting bodies and hips and lips and I don't even know what to say. Everyone's trying to look Black from how I'm seeing things. It's like I'm seeing, and obviously do what you want with your body. I really want to put that out there. You have your bodily autonomy, do what you want, whatever makes you happy. But when we're looking at shaming Black girls for literally having their own hair, their own bodies, and then you're going to replicate that on a surgeon table, make that make sense.
Yeah, I mean, they say they want our rhythms, but not our blues, right? Ooh. And that just puts it spot on there. That quote, I don't know who it is from, so excuse me.
That's amazing.
But
yeah,
so those are some kind of like key issues and ways. And I guess one thing I would add as well is like the concept and notion of mental health itself and the underpinning research, the assumptions behind it. It's all sort of like Eurocentric thinkers who are behind it.
Yeah.
And white supremacy obviously seeps within that.
Yeah,
and,
it does, yeah.
Like the handbook that's used by all mental health professionals, that's called the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Okay.
Very catchy name that they use, but it has like, it lists all 300 like mental disorders that exist.
Wow.
Apparently around the world.
300.
And all 300 of them, not one really recognizes the impact of like racism and mental health.
It doesn't?
No.
Interesting.
So that in itself, like if people don't even understand it, that kind of limits research, people's understanding, all these kind of other stuff as well. So,
wow. Thank you for your reflections. But, just to quickly add on what you've mentioned, I actually saw some research from your organization, which says that, for instance, young people from a Black African background are significantly more likely to be referred to inpatient and emergency services compared to their white counterparts. And conversely, that Black people are 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and I believe 10 times more likely to receive a community treatment order, which I think is absolutely, again, I'll be saying this all the time, I think, through this episode, absolutely bordering, absolutely just like, I don't get how that works. And even looking at, mental health disparities, I've noticed that there's in talking about some of the mental health disorders that you sort of briefly mentioned, that there is a overrepresentation in certain mental health disorders. So for example, like schizophrenia, there is so much, I think, representation in the Black community in that I feel like it's because, so let me land with this. So, schizophrenia is listed as a side effect of, frequent cannabis use. And as we all know here in this space, that cannabis is it is criminalized, but that's by the by. But cannabis is attributed to the Black community. It's I feel like it's got this sort of common sense synergy to it, which I think is highly racist, of course. But of course, when we're talking about schizophrenia and, the impact on the Black community and the impact of, Black young people that have schizophrenia, and the overrepresentation of that mental illness, you can see how and where that disjointed or that kind of bias comes in that whole process. And to sort of further that, likely, with schizophrenia, Black people are more likely to be given higher doses of medication, and they are less likely to receive psychotherapy. And touching on, again, you mentioned the DM5 handbook, which I think is really wild that they don't mention race. But when we're talking about mental health professionals, we don't really see many doctors, therapists, many professionals that look like us, which I think is a significant commentary on, again, pathways and access to this level of academia and access and well, for Black people actually to see people that look like them. Again, that positive representation piece. I mean, I can give a personal anecdote. I was trying to access, oh my God, my neck is really being cut off by this thing. I was, gosh, big boobs really do cut into everything. But yeah, so personal anecdote. I was accessing mental health support by a healthcare provider, which I won't name and shame. And they gave me a therapist. She was a white woman. I've had many white women therapists before, and they've all been great. But I feel like in my journey, and having that knowledge of, the impact and the benefit really of having that cultural likeness, especially when because I don't want to be talking and having to dissect with you how a particular interaction was microaggressive or how it wasn't. I don't want to be doing that with a white person. But having that cultural knowledge now, I'm like, no, I need someone that looks like me, that thinks like me, that has the same skin color. Anyways, and I think, as Black people, as people of the global majority, I feel like each of us should have that right to exercise that. Yeah. So anyways, this healthcare provider, I was given a white lady, but this therapist, first therapist I've ever connected with where I thought, no, we don't really click at all. And I felt that she was quite, I guess, closed off in what I needed support for at the time. So I called the healthcare provider and I was like, hey, no personal feelings. I would like to request a Black therapist just because I feel like it's just going to be a lot easier. And I feel like if we're not communicating now, I don't know how far we're going to get. And the person on the phone had the audacity to tell me that me requesting a Black therapist was racist. I was fucking fuming. I was fucking fuming. Wow. Because how dare you? That's not racist at all. I don't know where we got that from. It was like racial discrimination. So I literally sat him down on that phone. I don't know how long on the phone for. I was like, let me tell you something, Buster. Okay, it's not racist to request.
Reverse racism.
Do you know what I mean? Like, get out. It's like, get your head out of your own arse. Like, I said to him, like, same thing I've literally just said here, the same spiel, like cultural likeness, cultural knowledge, racial literacy is important when accessing mental health, especially as a Black person, especially if you're an Asian person, especially if you're a person from an Indigenous background. I think it is imperative to have someone that can identify, because again, with racism, it's not as outward as an expletive term. It's so pervasive. It could be, you could take it from a body language cue. That's how pervasive racism is. So if I'm talking to a therapist and they're telling me, oh, I don't think that's right. Oh, I don't have time for it. But anyways, after that whole parade, he was like, no, what I meant was, I was like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I did get my black therapist though, in the end, and that was that. But talk about disparity. I think
you shouldn't have to challenge it though. That's the thing. And also for me, right, fundamentally what I think it's about is choice.
Yes.
Because even if you say race, that might not, like this week, for example, we put out with the Wolf Institute, like a new fact sheet on Muslim mental health, for example,
Congrats.
right? So some people want faith-informed mental health services.
Yes.
Like it depends on what
the needs are.
What's important. And that's where intersectionality comes in, right?
Yes.
Into play. So
Yes.
it might be more important for you to have a woman than a black man therapist, you know? So I think choice, autonomy, flexibility are the key pillars here, and we don't have that in a system because we've got a very broken system. That means you just get what you get.
Yeah, it's true. It really is. Yeah,
you know. And I would say on your points about schizophrenia, I'd recommend people checking out Dr. Colin King's work on this.
Fantastic.
He talks a lot about like drapetomania and like how
What's drapetomania? Sorry.
So I'm probably not going to describe it well at
That's
all.
okay.
But he talks about just like how it was a condition given to like black slaves when they ran away. So it was like they became mentally ill and that's why they ran away. And then eventually, I think the theory is that this became what we know now as like schizophrenia, as like, he talks about some of the linkages there.
Wow.
And I'm not going to just reduce it to that, but like he
That's
talks
insane,
a lot
though.
about like, maybe is that why black people are like over diagnosed with this condition.
I literally just, as you said that, I was like, that probably is why.
Yeah, so his work is really interesting. I would recommend people reading it because it's much more robust than what I just said. But
incredible.
I mean, these disparities are huge. And like even last year, just from data that was leaked to The Independent, it showed that black children and black mixed race young people were like made up 36% of those in mental health hospitals, but just 5% of those getting help in community mental health services. So why is that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, what is the reason behind that? Like, we need to really unpack. You know?
Wow, that's mad.
Hello. Sorry if I scared you. While we take a break, I thought it would be a good time to introduce myself. My name is Francesco Ruvolo, proud videographer and editor of To Be Confirmed. Please show your support by hitting the like and subscribe button. Stay tuned to the very end where we'll be playing a fun game called Wavelength, in which you at home can play along. Back to the episode now.
Hey. ASMR. This is... You'll hear later on in the episode, but we have dubbed this our symbolic, I guess, reincarnation of the white folding chair of the Battle of Montgomery on the 8th of August, a month today, actually, of 2023. But sorry, don't mind me fanning myself off. So to continue, I guess, our conversation around mental health disparities, why is it, do you think, that, you know, we see these barriers in black children, in children of colour?
Yeah, so I guess the obvious one is that racism and discrimination is like inherently baked into the system. Mm-hmm. So the lack of like understanding from the design of services all the way through to like delivery is racism features as like an issue, I would say. And then another issue is like stigma comes up a lot. So, you know, obviously we work in the mental health space and we know how much stigma impacts people's help-seeking behaviours and things like that. But we've made like so much like significant strides over the last few decades around this. When it comes to the black community, I think like we're starting to like understand how stigma works both ways. So black communities are stigmatized anyway, and they have to deal with the double stigma of facing racism and mental health. Yeah. Mental ill health, if you like. And then also stigma might be perpetuated within communities where some people, at least anyway in my community, might recommend that you use alternative forms of like support over, you know, health professionals' advice. And a lot of this is actually because of mistrust, misunderstandings from the health service in the first place. Yeah. But I think people write it off as saying, oh, this community doesn't understand mental health. Or like they value other forms of support. So those are factors. And then more recently, like when I've been working with young people, they talk a lot about like the lack of culturally and racially responsive mental health services. We talked about this as well in the past. Yeah. And like they just don't feel, you know, the intervention or the setting that the support is given reflects like their identity. So like, what's the point of going
Yeah.
if they don't see themselves? So all those things really like contribute to like young Black people not getting the timely support they need. And then what happens is their problems worsen over time.
Yeah.
And that's why then we might see them as like young adults coming up to, you know, like crisis services. So it's all like letting these problems fester and become more serious.
It's a snowball, isn't it? It's that snowball effect.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that, Kadra. I feel like that leads us perfectly into the next question, which is, what double standards do you see in the way that Black youth are treated in society? And do you think that this enables empathy from other people when relating to or speaking to or about Black youth? So before you answer that question, I really want to sort of, I guess, hopefully to spice this up a little bit. I want to, in this research, I Googled each of the terms and I screenshotted what came up. And I thought for me in that research process, it was so interesting to see how the algorithm really showed up for Black youth. And I say that ironically. So for those of us that are listening into the podcast, not watching, there's a screenshot of literally the first result page of when I've typed in the phrase Black youth innocence. So on the screen here, we see the first result, which is from let me not break my own neck, which is from the American Psychological Association, which we see Black boys viewed as older, less innocent than whites. Second, by the Washington Post, Black kids' typical childhood is often seen as a crime. And the second slide there, you see again the Rage of Innocence, which I thought was this is a book actually, but not great, but juxtaposition there, and just more sort of results here really in terms of the phrase innocence, the response to innocence, the way that the algorithm, categorizes Blackness in proximity to innocence really. So centralized back on the question really, what double standards do you see in the way that Black youth are treated in society, and do you think this brings apathy when people are speaking to about Black youth?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously all those examples, majority of them kind of criminalize young people, so you can already see what the double standard is there. And obviously when we met at the conference last year, Janine Davis, the doctor Janine Davis, she was speaking there, and she has been developing some groundbreaking work and frameworks to highlight the impact of adultification on Black children. And basically that just means where Black young people and children in particular are denied their innocence, and they're treated more as adults than they are as children. So they're guilty until proven innocence, rather than the other way around, right? That's the presumption. And so, we've seen countless examples of this in the press recently, where obviously there was a young woman in Hackney who was a young child, I should actually say, because I think she's under 16, who was strip searched in school, and adultification played a part there, because it was just the assumption of criminality associated with her identity and racism, basically, that she was, and the whole process behind it was just not keeping safeguarding in mind in terms of as you would normally children in a school setting, and when it comes to strip search. So huge double standards, and it goes back to the kind of earlier reflections as sometimes you're independent and sometimes you're not. This is the case where you're like hyper made to feel independent by the systems that surround young people. So and obviously it definitely fuels apathy in lots of ways, in that sense. So I think more people need to know about adultification, 100%. Read up on it, and put it to an end as well.
100%. I definitely agree with you. Following on what you've said, and the clear, I guess the word that we're looking for is we've said it already, double standards. It shouldn't be so painfully clear to see such a disparity, especially against our demographic, against our community as a whole. I was looking at a report titled, it was written by Jessica Pereira, and it's called How Black Working Class Youth Are Criminalised and Excluded in the English School System. It was published this year. And she writes, and I quote, there is a long history of new right, so that is right wing for folks that don't know. And I hope you're clocking on to where I'm going with this, with right wing politics and the government that we have in power and all of that. Cool. There is a long history of new right thinking in brackets, that came to prominence under Thatcherism, another Tory, placing the blame for racial disadvantage on the failures of the Black family, which for me, when I read that sentence, I was like, that's an aha moment. Like, of course they are. Of course they do that. Of course they place the structural neglect and the structural incompetence of our institutions, such as healthcare, on, the Black family, on the Black community. And of course, this revelation for me identified how we see that propagandized as well in media as well. And like I said, with the linking in 2 and 2 being 4, we are 13 years into a Tory government. So let that be what you will. Do you know what I mean? In terms of innocence, the criminalisation of blackness that we've spoken about in several bits and pieces in terms of, double standards. Stop and search is a huge intimidation tactic used by the police force. As of 2023, there were 27.2 stop and searches per 1,000 people for Black people. That's the stat. And then in comparison, there were 5.6 stop and searches for every 1,000 white people, which again, you see the disparity there. Section 60 orders. So for those across the pond, Section 60 is a power that's used by the police force in the UK. Section 60 is another word of saying suspicionless searches. So by, actually, let me not say something I don't know, but basically with a Section 60, they have absolutely any and every reason to search you, even if you aren't committing a crime, even if you aren't in possession of anything illegal. And Black people are 18 times more likely to be stopped and searched under this power than white people, which again, if we look at the impact, like for example, this example isn't a stop and search, but the Croydon situation, the mother that was accused of not paying her TFL fare, then the child literally, and the footage of that as well, the child seeing the mother
£1.20
for £1.20, like for a TFL fare. Like I don't understand that, but seeing that kind of power, and also I've also noticed there is always excessive police presence in anything that is with blackness. Like with the lady that got stopped and whatever, accosted for that TFL fare. How many 4 or 5 police officers for one person? Right, okay. And, to follow on the criminalisation of blackness, we see that, and we've said this in different words earlier today, but we see the marrying of violence and blackness as a singular entity. And of course, we see that in media representations. An example that came to mind as I was piecing this together was in the senseless, and I really want to state very clearly, the senseless murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell in Liverpool. If you remember, basically the story of it was unfortunate, basically in her family home, and the 2 assailants broke into the house, and there was a dispute between the 2 assailants, but unfortunately she was caught in the crossfire. Now, in the wake of when this originally happened, I believe it was the end of, that was me talking really quickly, sorry guys. When that incident happened at the end of last year, I believe there was a lot of uproar, and understandably, this is a 9-year-old girl that's died for no reason. That's a life lost, and that's a family that's going through that grief. And there was a discussion on Good Morning Britain with this, they call themselves a journalist, but this journalist called Andrew Pearce, who on Good Morning Britain made the comment that the shooting of Olivia Pratt was reflective of an issue of crime in the Black community, which was like, whoa, like, hold on a second. One way to, sick all of the racist dogs on us, like one way to criminalize us even further. And thankfully, a lawyer called Maverine Cole, and she's also a newsreader, she was on that panel when Andrew Pearce made that comment. She set him straight. She immediately said, there was also another panelist on Andrew Pearce's side. She was a white woman, and she also, that's what you call allyship right there. Well, an example of allyship, actually. Let me not give too many flowers. But those 2 women, but particular focus on Maverine Cole, immediately said, that's not on, that's not right. And you could see in Andrew Pearce's face, he just was like, but anyways, literally. But to clarify for those in the room, the perpetrators were in fact not Black. So it's again, that racist connotation of,
even if they were.
Please, why would you use that as an opportunity to make a comment on a situation where is a product of socioeconomic decline and disenfranchisement? It makes no sense. But I don't know. I just think that level, and also the way, when I was assessing the way Andrew Pearce was talking, the body language, the way he was dismissive, as if that was an instinctive thing to say.
And it's a fact.
As a fact. Like, it's not a fact. It was, do you know what I mean? Like, I just thought it was so, that level of apathy, that level of it's a them problem.
But that just what you described, I wouldn't even say is just particular to right thinking, because I actually think it's across the political spectrum.
That's true.
Actually, the opposition have had members in the past who have attributed it to black fathers not being in the picture, and all this kind of stuff. It all adds to the same
thing
type of argument.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Which
it makes no fucking sense.
Nope.
But thank you for that. But that leads us actually, I think, pretty nicely into question number 6. So the question is, education is one of the first experiences of socializing with different people from a multitude of backgrounds, class, and experience. From policing hairstyles to child strip searches, incessant bullying and lack of safeguarding from responsible adults, how should schools ensure that they are equitably safeguarding the lives of Black children?
So firstly, I think it's very important for anyone working in schools to actually understand the link between racism and young people's well-being. And actually, I think that conference we attended also last year, I keep referring to it.
Yes.
But lots of people made the point that racism should be seen as a safeguarding issue. And that's the first step, that 100%. Actually it is recognised as such, whether it's perpetuated by people within the school, amongst, pupils themselves, outside of school, whatever, it should be kind of recognised as such, right?
I agree.
So that's the first thing that again, you need to understand and accept that it's the daily reality for your pupils from racialized backgrounds. And for me, I think, again, then to confront it, you need to take a very multi-systemic approach. It's not, there's no single solution out there. So
an
you need to
intersectional approach.
a whole school approach to it. When you hear about schools that have such effective practice generally, they even involve dinner ladies and everyone in the whole process in understanding how do we have a healthy, thriving school environment. So it should be within that context. For me, it doesn't need to be its own standalone thing. And I think, thinking about those practices and interventions that exist in schools that we need to kind of challenge. Again, this isn't a formal organizational position of mine, but just thinking about the debates around policing in school and how that led to the Child Q incident and many others. There's a charity in Greater Manchester called Kids of Colour, and they've been doing lots of campaigning around getting rid of police in schools, because is that actually the solution for keeping children safe?
It's daunting.
And, for any of us, even if I was a child going to school, seeing police officers
I'd
around.
Be scared as hell.
Yeah.
I still am scared as hell.
Even some schools get, pupils get searched upon entry to school, which is and all these kind of practices that you hear about. I don't think it really is about keeping children safe, because if that's the case, think about upstreaming the type of support that you create, working with your communities, your local authorities, the families. Again, there's always such a major disconnect between parents and schools and stuff like that. So I think all of those things for me would help make a more equitable safeguarding approach. I need to be kept in mind.
Fabulous. Thank you for that reflection. Even actually following on from what you've just shared, in a 2023 report by the House of Commons on racial discrimination in schools, it says, actually, this is directly quoted from the piece here, all state-funded schools in England must, 1, have an anti-bullying policy and a behaviour policy, 2, comply with the Equality Act of 2010 and not unlawfully discriminate against pupils or prospective pupils on the grounds of race or other protected characteristics, and 3, in line with the Public Sector Equality Duty, PSED, I don't know what that means, but that's what they put there. Which again, when I read it, I was like, oh, so what are the recommendations for private schools then? But again, we've just discussed some of the things that are happening in schools. So, on a governmental level, are these, the recommendations aren't even clear enough or specific enough to really provide that, that insight or that care. Again, with schools, we have Ofsted. We know the disparities in school qualifications in Ofsted as well. How do they take a anti-racist intersectional approach? Intersectional approach in looking at schools? They could. Let's say that. They could take an intersectional approach in how they assess schools. So it's, again, I guess, to simplify it, for those of us at home that are in denial in the year of 2023 that race does not have an influence on everything, please take a drink of water with me, take a deep breath,
I might do that
okay?
myself. Yes.
Okay, Wusa, everything is to do with race, okay? If it isn't clear what we're discussing right here today, it should be now you've heard it. And that's only focusing on what? Education and the government as we know it. So there's that. We're talking about a safe environment, safeguarding schools. And when I was thinking about this question, I take things quite literally, I suppose. I'm a Capricorn, but I was thinking about the literal, safe space, the buildings that schools are in. And as we know in the news, currently there are plenty of school closures due to concrete construction issues, which I think after Grenfell, I think that's quite ironic, actually, that there's now some insight into how buildings are being made, but then they're being poorly made, but then data is allegedly being wiped off systems, but then people don't want to pay up for Grenfell or take accountability for Grenfell or these things. Anyways, these schools that have been affected, from what I understand, currently the government have not actually released the list of schools that have been affected, which for me provides an interesting reflection around, postcode areas, like you mentioned, the schools that maybe, have those extra search measures in. And of course, the density of the population, the ethnic backgrounds in the areas where the schools are closed in, are they getting support from, teachers? Are they getting, homeschooling packs so that, for low income families? How are the children going to eat? Do you know what I mean?
And why did we get to this point where kids are meant to be going back to school in a few days, and then this is a discovery?
And we had a whole,
which has long been known.
Do you know what I mean? And we had a whole 6-week holiday. Do you know what I mean? I don't get it. And to say that as well, with the whole building debacle and this whole debacle, the Department of Education have been found out. It is on other media outlets before people jump down my throat. The Department of Education just finalised on a £32 million office refurbishment, which I think is very audacious to say the least, in a cost of living crisis. And furthermore, with failing young people, with black young people, again, my mind goes through to the A-level debacle of 2021, where Gavin Williamson was in office, and the whole issue of, predicted grades being higher in richer boroughs, richer areas than there were of, socio and economically deprived areas. Side note, actually, that summer of 2021, it was really heartening. Is that the right word? Yeah, it was really heartening. It was really warming for me to see such young people really get outside and say, give me my grades. Of course. In their droves. I was so I remember being you know what?
I worked with some of them, and I was like, wow. I can't believe that you were predicted at A, and then they've given you a D. What do you mean? Or what do you mean? It's mad.
It was mad. But thank goodness that's been resolved to some extent. But even what you mentioned about Janine Davis, she is cited as the UK's foremost researcher and thought leader in adultification. And she actually says, similar to what you mentioned earlier about having that intersectional approach, she says, and I quote, "If equity, diversity and inclusion is not centred in child safeguarding practice, regardless of the intervention and approaches taken, adultification is likely to occur," which again, really apt to say the least. Now, thinking about children in schools and neurodiversity as well, statistically, I did an Instagram live with the CEO of Black Send Mamas UK. Basically, I'll talk a bit about them a bit later. But I did a talk on, race and neurodiversity.
Awesome organisation.
Amazing work, amazing woman, great stuff. Please support the cause. And we discussed a lot of the disproportionality as well in, for parents, but also for, children that are neurodiverse, that are going through school and who are black. And some of those research statistics that we went through were, there is clearly an ethnic disproportionality in the identification of special educational needs in England. So, for instance, Black, Caribbean and Pakistani pupils are overrepresented in moderate learning difficulties, and Indian and Chinese pupils are underrepresented. Now, on top of that, under 1.5 million pupils in England have special educational needs, but only 350,000 out of that 1.5 million have educational health plans, which means what? So just under 1.2 are left hanging. How?
We don't have money for it.
You don't have money, but you're paying £32 to do up new chairs and new carpet. Do better. Oh my God. and then also, like I said, thinking about, the role of neurodivergence, that even that experience for children in schools, you know what I mean? Like, again, I'm thinking back to my own, well, not my personal experience, but looking at, my witnessing of experiences, should I say, people who were neurodivergent and the attitudes that was had back in the day. The conversations weren't as progressive as they were in present day. People used to be bullied for being autistic, for having
they
ADHD.
still do to a certain extent here. I think we have an understanding, but the support is still the same sort of levels as it was
back in the day. It's true. But my mind, when I was, again, going through this research again, was just, I feel for the children. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're part of that 1.1 something that has no support outside of your parents, like, what is that like for you at school? How are you able to identify to your, your teachers, if something's not quite right? With that being said, statistically, Black boys are more likely to be diagnosed with autism than Black girls are, and diagnoses for both autism and ADHD are late for Black youth, which I think is absolutely insane. On top of that, on top of that, in terms of education being the first experience of diversity of culture and perspectives, I can't negate the role of the school curriculum in this as well. So, the role of culture for myself as a Black woman, for yourself as a Black woman, coming into school, you want to learn about, well, presumably you want to learn about so many things, but also you want to learn about, well, obviously aside from your own family giving you your history, but you want to learn about your history in schools. How is it represented? How do we get here, essentially? And I wanted to touch on actually something that Kemi Badenoch, who is the Equalities Minister, mentioned. So there was a lot of conversation in 2021 about changing the curriculum to include information around the colonization of, Africa, and also the role of Britain in the colonial empire. And Kemi Badenoch, I like to say, not all skin folk are kinfolk, and I'll leave that as my professional comment. But Kemi Badenoch likened that introduction to the curriculum as breaking the law, which I thought was like, wow, okay, cool. And then when you think of, well,
in what way?
In what way? How is what's the word? How is enriching people's racial literacy and knowledge, and also
it's
knowledge,
not even just that,
wrong?
That history is British history. That's just what it is.
It is what it is.
It's not even about racial literacy.
Yeah.
This is just actually facts what happened. Why do I know about the Watergate scandal but not about the Atlantic slave trade?
Literally, I'm learning about the Cold War and all this ish, but I'm not learning about anything that's relating to me. Like, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, in the same breath, you see things in the media. I saw things in the media where, for instance, regarding the education of race and developing that knowledge, or the lack of education.
Critical race theory, which it isn't. But okay.
Honestly, but the lack of education, I think indirectly affects the safeguarding of children, because I saw an article where, there are murmurs of how people being taught about white privilege makes white students feel uncomfortable, white pupils, I should say, feel uncomfortable. There was an article I read where they were saying how white privilege and white fragility is ignoring the issues faced by working class children. There's an article from the Telegraph that reflects what I just said, which I found quite interesting, because I was thinking, what was that? When was that dialogue had by teachers, and how do they suddenly have that analysis to think about, the impact of talking about race on any type of, on Black children, on brown children? And furthermore, did they have this same thinking when they were reading Of Mice and Men in class and getting people to say the M word and all that ish?
Well, quite.
Do you know what I mean? Like, quite proudly, oh, no, it's just in the book. It's just in the book. I didn't say it. It's just, no, you were comfortable with using racial profanity and encouraging students to use racial profanity, but not thinking about race and racism. And furthermore, again, in talking about race and racism and they brought in white working class boys, I really want to state here, white privilege does not respect class, okay? That's not negating the economic issues that can be faced. But whether or not people want to, I think you need to reconcile with that idea, but whether or not people want to reconcile with that idea, if you are of white heritage, of white skin, you are a benefactor of the legacy of slavery. That's just point blank, period. Okay. And it's so ingrained that you are unaware of it, and that when you were made to be aware of it. There's that moment of, oh, what, how dare you? Well, black people get privilege because they have to say what they need to say, and we ended slavery and we did this. You started the mess, you cleaned it up. Don't try and claim some sort of, I guess, higher ground. Okay. How does racism in schools then, do you think, impact the mental health of black youth?
So yeah, I guess, again, in a similar way that experiencing racism harms your mental health, that plays out in a school setting as well. We know, again, thinking about school uniform policy and the restrictions around that, and like, you know, if you're, for example, from a Muslim background, being told what color, there was a school where the pupils actually organized a sit-in in their playground last summer because the school was trying to dictate what color or what shape and size hijab you should be allowed to wear. Whatever.
What?
So all the children in solidarity actually had a sit. So
I love that. I love that.
All this stuff. And there was a big focus in that school. I think they had a new leader who may have since left, about instilling British values within the school, and like that being demonstrated by having a flag in the playground and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, but this is in a very diverse area. And what are you doing to actually promote the identities and celebrate the backgrounds of those peoples in your place? So yeah, so again, school uniform kind of policies, hair discrimination we touched on a little bit more. Again, another incredible group of young people came up with the campaign, the Halo Code, where they're trying to get schools and workplaces to sign up to this
yes,
charter.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, you've heard of it. And I think even in America, going beyond that, it might have been in California if I'm not mistaken, but they've got like a hair discrimination act, and they're trying to also push for something like that here, where that actually it should be illegal for you to be discriminated against on the basis of your hair. And you might think, why is that related to mental health? Of course it is, because you're being told the way that you just appear and come to school is like a problem. And that you must, you know, again, these are the kind of things that like feel like imposter syndrome for young people from a very young age, but also it's kind of like living a double life in a way. You know what I mean? It's like I have to come to school with this white mask, right?
Literally, white mask.
White mask.
Yes.
What's it called? Blackface, white mask.
I think it's like what? Oh, it's so embarrassing
white mask,
now.
Blackface.
I think that's. Let me Google that real quickly. But I know what you're saying because I know the title.
It's just kind of living this double life when you can just be yourself. Like we talk a lot, especially in our sector, right?
That's it. Black skin, white masks. Frantz Fanon.
Yeah, that's it.
There we go, yes.
You know, about bringing your whole self to work. But we're not allowing children to bring their whole selves to school.
It's
and
wrong.
Obviously, there has to be some degree of like standardization, which I understand, but that's going to look different for different groups of young people. And like just to accommodate those diversity in that way doesn't actually impact their educational outcomes, because that's what I want to see. How does wearing an afro or not having your hair cut to a certain level actually impact your attainment?
Do you know what I mean? You think the hair is coming from my brain. Do you know what I mean?
So all those kind of things, like, you know, and we touched on the curriculum earlier, not being reflective, that again makes you feel like this world and this, you know, all the systems around it that have been built up, like you've not been a part of it when you have, for example.
No, literally, you have such a refined like knowledge. Like again, I didn't know all of or everything that I know now from the schooling system. I had to do that work myself.
And again, the lack of diversity in teachers and senior leaders in the education system as well. So again, even thinking about teaching as an aspiration for your career doesn't come up. So we at the centre, we've been working with Diana Ward and UK Youth on a programme called Young Changemakers. And basically we've been supporting young people, Black people across the country to come up with their own social actions around tackling racism and mental health. And one of the key ones that they came up with initially was a group of young people called Not So Micro. You can find them on all sort of like social platforms. And they're like trying to highlight the impact of racial microaggressions on young people's mental health in school. And like they're calling for anti-racism and anti-microaggression training to form part of mandatory teacher training. And they've had a petition. They've got like some new funding to like deliver training in schools themselves. And this is all youth-led. And this is, you know, it shouldn't be up to us adults deciding what we think is most important to them. This came naturally from them. And it, again, aligns with the evidence we talked about. You know, I think people need to take it seriously, and it's high time that we had something like that.
High time. I definitely agree. And thank you for that. Again, we've touched on this we've touched on this basically. But again, coming from the Runnymede Trust's research, some of the common themes that they have identified in the pervasiveness of racism in schools include low levels of racial literacy among school staff. So what you were saying about taking a whole school approach, from the dinner ladies right to the pupils themselves. You've mentioned this as well. Policing activity and presence in schools being concentrated in areas with higher deprivation, which of course tend to have larger Black and minority ethnic populations. Again, I think part of what we discussed already, as I was going through this, my brain was like, what if, and I think it is, what if all of this restriction is to break the spirit and the self-esteem of like Black folks, of Black youth? And the reason I say that, not only in just how, we're meant to present ourselves and the way our hair grows and whatnot, thinking about, career options, when you're in secondary school, for instance, you start looking at, what you want to do in college and what subjects you want to study. And so often you see or hear or experience yourself as a young Black person where a lot of teachers will redirect people's passions, especially if they're creative, especially if they want to go into anything administrative. I noticed that it can be quite, maybe if you want to go into healthcare, or if you want to go into social care, or maybe,
Why have we all heard this, by the way? I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. And it's like, maybe you can be an administrator.
Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe you can be a receptionist. And it's like, why are Black people not supposed to have dreams, please? And of course, unfortunately, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's unfortunate. I guess it is, because how many of those dreams may have been crushed? But we see a lot of the, a huge population of the sanitation and the healthcare industries are of Black people, are of people of colour widely.
And migrants as well.
And
to
migrants.
Add that intersecting factor.
Yeah. And if we see the way the government are treating migrants and using them as if they're disposable tissues and encouraging people to spew out the most disgusting migrant rhetoric, it's the legacy of British colonialism. It's picking and taking and then discarding as if we're absolutely nothing. Like it boils my blood.
Mine too.
Do you know what I mean? Like it jars me so much. Like, again, back on my "you started this shit" rant. Like, you can't sit there and colonize countries. You can't, cause genocide on so many people across the world. Okay, I want to take away from I want to sort of shift away from the Black diaspora for a second. Across the whole world, colonize the whole world, steal from them, pillage their cities, force them into religious and social practices, and then years, centuries down the line, you have the audacity to tell them that they have no right to respond to you the way they want to respond to you. They have no right to criticize your legacy or how your legacy or how your actions have impacted the current day for all of these countries. Like, or
just survive and live. As basic as that, they can't be allowed to.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so we can't try and make a name for ourselves. We can't live.
Criticize, but they can't just have a normal standard of living.
It does. It really hurts me, because it's like all of these countries, all of these cultures, and again, I'm so happy and grateful for us as a Black diaspora, but for other cultures and countries that have been colonized by the British, that they have still had the opportunity to hold on to their cultures and hold on to their legacies, because it's not like, again, people want to and and I'm British and get out my country. Shut the fuck up, man. Shut the fuck up. Like, don't. You have no right to tell me how to feel when your ancestors literally like enslaved my people. Like, don't. Anyways, before I go on another rampage, we see here as well with institutional racism, we mentioned this before with young Black boys being adultified. Young Black boys are nearly 4 times more likely to receive a permanent school exclusion, twice as likely to receive a fixed period exclusion, which again, insane. 49% of Black people felt that racism was the biggest barrier to attaining success in school, while 50% said that the biggest barrier was their teacher saying that their perceptions of them were being seen as too aggressive. Again, that piece on innocence,
And that's a fact, because I don't know if you've seen the documentary, I think it was on BBC, about schools for like the people deemed educationally subordinate.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Sorry, It was based on a book and the name of the author escapes me at this time. But basically, they actually had special schools for Black people they deemed educationally subordinate, or actually many of them had like undiagnosed special educational needs or mental health problems and stuff, but some of them, it was just because they were Black and they came to this country that they were deemed as like less intellectually
That's
able
wrong.
and stuff like that. And
That's
that
medical
legacy
racism.
still, again, continues in education. I think it was
Literally.
only up until like the 80s or something.
Wow.
Those schools were
But even
closed down.
then, that's the product of medical racism as well, and eugenics,
Of course, all of it.
Insane, like
course,
absolutely
yeah.
insane. I want to sort of quickly smooge. I don't know, smooge on. We'll use it as a word. Furthermore, racism in schools. We've touched on Child Q very, very, very lightly. The story of Child Q. I don't want to bore anyone again with the semantics. The information is out there, but long story short, a 14-year-old black girl was strip searched. She was also menstruating, so she was expected, and she had to unfortunately take off her menstruation garment in the presence of an amount of police officers without a responsible adult present. Not that the adult would have made a difference anyway to that traumatic experience, but she was strip searched, and as a result of that impacted their mental health severely. And from what I last checked, the family were taking legal action against the police, which I don't know what the results are now, but I hope they got something substantial from the force themselves. And in that, with racism from schools, it was multi-level, because not only was there, not only was there the insight from the police force, which has now been categorized as institutionally racist and sexist, but also we're talking about the school system. Again, a school system that is already, pulled and put against black children. That's ASMR. ASMR for those at home. I believe Child Q was on her way to an exam, wasn't she? Mm-hmm. So it's like, so you're now hindering her academic opportunities.
Or in the middle of the exam, and then I think it was that they smelled like weed.
Yes. And again, back to that piece on schizophrenia that you mentioned, that criminalization, that everything is interlinked, and it boils my blood. And again, personally, I'm of the opinion that the officers should have been named and shamed. But again, as we've seen in the politics, I guess, of the force in particular, the power of the badge clearly has no bounds. But Child Q is one example. And to take that even further, as a result of Child Q, of all of the boys that were strip searched in the UK between 2018 and 2020 by all boys, I say all children, sorry. So let me start that again.
Majority boys, right? Yeah.
Majority of boys. So there, between 2018 and 2020, 650 children were strip searched. Child Q was strip searched in 2020, just for context. With that being said, of the 650, 58% of the boys were black. Of all boys, let me start again. Jesus Christ. Stay with me. Of the 650 children that were strip searched, of all of the boys that were strip searched in that 650, 58% were black as described by the police officer. And of the 650 strip searches, 53% of all of them had no further action taken. So can you imagine all of that trauma, all of that hassle for no reason?
And that's the same with stop and search anyway, right? In terms of the lack of positive outcomes for them.
No, it's insane. If we could go to the next slide, please, my love. So following on from racism in schools, so for those listening in, there is a tweet thread which I am sharing at the moment where someone on Twitter tweeted the following question. To people of colour who went to a predominantly white school, would you send your children to a predominantly white school? So if we could go to the next slide, please. So all of there's a multitude of tweets on the screen.
I saw this exchange as well.
Yeah. So there's a multitude of tweets here which range from absolutely the fuck not. This shit is traumatizing, going from a predominantly black school to where you are maybe one of 15 to 20 in a grade of 100. No, it's not preparing them for the real world, and likely some things we've got to unpack at home daily. One person said, God forbid, shit, boring as hell. Someone else said, never, ever, ever again. Another person said, based on my experience, I wouldn't. Another person said, it wouldn't be my intention, but my priority would be that the school is of an excellent standard first. The reality is we live in Britain, so depending on the area I raise my children in, it's likely. And someone else said, I'm a lot more conscious for my own child. The school being good as well as diverse is important for us. And the final bit, which I will mention here, is another person said in response to the question, I don't know, but I can tell you that it was character building, which I concur with that.
In all caps.
No, in all caps as well, literally character building in caps, which of course, for those that are watching this episode, you can see all of the users on here are of an ethnic minority. I think they're all black, but of an ethnic minority. university here, and to see that the predominant word that stands out is no, should say a lot in relation to what we've just shared here with the impact of racism in schools. What was your experience like?
Yeah, I mean, just to reflect on that quickly, I guess like for me, a predominantly white school doesn't equal a good school. So
yes,
just to
that's
challenge
true.
some of the people who say actually it depends on if it's good or not, like those two things are not equal. I actually, I say this quite a lot to people, right? I grew up in South London in a very diverse part of it. And my primary and my secondary school was the most diverse places that I've ever been in my life. Probably my secondary school was majority Black as well. And I say this to a lot of people. I didn't know, like, I didn't really deep what it meant to be Black until I went to university.
Same.
Because it didn't matter when I was in secondary school. I had Colombian friends, Jamaican friends, Vietnamese friends. It was United Colours of Benetton. Nobody cared what you were. You just were from whatever background you were from, and everyone got along. Like there was some racial tensions that I might have been naive about, but we mainly from the teachers, I would say, not amongst the pupils. Like everyone was great. And then I'll go to secondary school and it's exactly this. Like university, 90% white, probably. And then it's like the Black people stick together, or the people of colour stick together.
They do,
And I was just like, what is this? And then the world of work mirrors that too.
Yeah, it really does.
I was just like, whoa, my whole life just flipped.
It's so true. I guess to counteract that, like my primary school experience was amazing. I loved my primary school. I have such fond memories of my primary school. Very ethnically diverse. So I was born in London, raised in London, Northwest London, for those of us who are from Northwest, North. So it was very diverse. And then I went to secondary school in Cambridge. So I like to say I'm from London and Cambridge because my formative years were in Cambridge. And I had an okay experience. But again, at the time, I wasn't really aware of my race, I don't think. I wasn't predominantly aware. Cambridge is a largely, it's starting to get multicultural because we have Anglia-Ruskin University there. But it's a predominantly white city, really. And as I was looking at the tweets in response to the main question, I can think of only one example where like I felt like, oh, okay, I'm a Black girl, but okay, no, this is racism. But anyways, I'll dive into it. So in secondary school, I had a crush. And huge side note, my best friend, she said to me once that I get a lot of flack for my taste in my crushes, but especially my taste in men. And she said to me one day that my taste in men is like if someone chewed gum, spat it out, stomped on the ground, and there was hair coming out of that gum, and that's a representation of what my taste in men is like. But you know what? She was right, because you'll hear this story in a minute. So this particular person I had a crush on. This was like the crush of all crushes. Like this person was so fun fact, I'm a Michael Jackson super fan. I love his music, love everything. And the crush I had was on this person that was also a Michael Jackson super fan. So like,
I thought he was going to say his name is Michael Jackson.
Oh no! Can you imagine? No. I'm not trying to get any. No. But the person was also a Michael Jackson super fan. So like to the point where like in my secondary school, you could identify the both of us like that. But with this particular Michael Jackson super fan, and I guess, you know, part of that is growing up and being naive and whatnot and learning, you know, your self-esteem. But this guy, you know, I get you don't like someone, that's fine. I didn't get the memo, that's okay. But this person would consistently racially like assault me. So like I'd be talking to him and he'd be calling me like gollywog, the M word with the hard R, literally like saying shit like about how like he'll get his family on me, like purely just for having like an interest in him. And the thing is, like at secondary school, I was there like la 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 la, like oh my god, like he's so cute and Michael Jackson and this and that and the other. But like looking back and upon reflection, like it really, even as I'm talking about it, like I'm angry at myself for allowing that to go on for so long. And I'm angry that like I didn't notice at the time that guy was just purely disrespecting me. Like it's one thing to not have a crush, but to go as far as like racially assaulting someone every time they speak to you for the sake of just doing it.
Don't girls get taught that if a guy's being mean to you,
that they like you. So, that patriarchy programming there. But yeah, it's disgusting. Yeah, so if and when he hears this, fuck you, in the words of Lily Allen. And oh no, let me stop right there. I was going to be really immature, but no, fuck you. And I hope that all your Michael Jackson CDs are scratched. So That leads to the next.
No, but it's real. It's a real example of how it goes. So.
I'm looking off camera, my editor, like he went to secondary school with me, so he's like, oh God, I know who it is. I'm not a superhero person. I don't care for DC. Like, I know Marvel has legacy. Not on camera, child, but yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, his personality, all there like creasing. But you know what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, so he can see he's got a copy of my script. So he can
okay.
So he can see the reads.
Right.
He can see the reads that I had actually planned for this, but I didn't say because I just thought no. So that's why I used the Michael Jackson CDs. But yes. So that leads us perfectly actually into question. I hope this isn't like in the mic, but into question number 8. So in light of those reflections, what can parents and carers do to help their child navigate the experiences of racism in school, and what can they do to challenge it directly?
Yeah, so I would say there's many different ways that parents and carers can go about tackling racism. First of all, I would say that parents and carers themselves also need to understand racism.
Yes.
And sometimes I would say, again, especially in the context of multiracial households or within the context of fostering or adoption, for example, we can't take it for granted and believe that all carers are people with lived experience as well, because that's not always the case. So that's the first point, because I actually, in my experience and from friends I've had or young people I've worked with in the past who've had a white parent and from a multi-ethnic background, their white parent doesn't always understand their experiences, and sometimes inadvertently, indirectly, is racist towards their own child without even knowing. So we need to start off with like checking ourselves and like how we behave and all that kind of stuff as parents and carers.
Yes.
Then I would say, following on from that, really encouraging open and honest conversations with your child about racism and their experiences. And like, obviously, you know, like there's been a lot recently about like going back to your point about talking to children about white privilege. You know, the backlash to that is like, why are we talking to children about race so young? But then it's like, for Black families, you have to have the talk so young.
Young.
You know that like inevitably racism is going to feature in their life, and you need to prepare them for it and not put them out into the world thinking it's all hunky-dory, because it's not. So again, just thinking about how to handle those conversations sensitively. And actually next month, we're going to be publishing a summary of some research we did with King's College University with an all-Black research team led by an amazing woman of colour, Yasmin, as well, who looking at like the impact of intergenerational racism between parents and children, and like how that's perceived and stuff. It's going to be so interesting to watch this space.
I'm excited. Yes.
So that will kind of hopefully give you a...
Sorry. Yes. Sorry.
I know.
No, but yeah, sorry, you were saying.
No. So, you know, however way they want to convene those conversations in AI, if they want to have those
Get Pinky Doll on that,
you know, with their child. And then I would say, then thinking about if there's concerns, obviously speaking to the teachers within the school to raise it so it's on their radar. And, you know, obviously, ultimately, when things like that take place in school, it's the responsibility of teachers to act on it and all that kind of stuff. I would also say, you know, thinking about active participation, like joining school councils or parent councils so that you can actually advocate directly on behalf of your child, but also all children who might be affected by it. And then if as a parent or carer, you don't feel confident enough in doing those things directly, there's so many other organizations out there that can support you, like advocacy organizations. So Quorum, for example, Just for Kids Law, what else did I have? Children's Commissioner for England. Loads of these organizations exist to kind of like support families dealing with this stuff. And then also lots of charities. So just looking in your local authority to see places where you can get information and advice to deal with this stuff. So those are some things that I think parents and carers could do.
Thank you. That's amazing recommendations. Thank you for that. And definitely, once the research is out, I'm so excited to see it, and I'll definitely link it for listeners to listen into.
Thank you.
I might not have professional reflections, but I say name and shame the racists, really and truly. In the case of Thomas Knive at school, where the girl was, young Black girl was beaten up by a family of travellers. But not only was she beaten up, she was filmed. And then all the witnesses that were in her vicinity, including the head
adults.
teacher.
Yeah. No.
The head teacher. or watched that happen. And the minute that footage was posted online, in 24 hours, phone lines were down, protests were outside the school. I don't know if the head teacher has left yet or not. I don't know. I don't think he has, because racism. But that was one example of naming and shaming the school, for instance. Again, parents keeping an extensive record of racism in school. So, date, timing, all of that important information, because if you do need to step it up in the legal manner, you have that documented proof. And again, following on to what we just mentioned in terms of, the governmental recommendations, legally speaking, if we're looking at that recommendation, 2023's recommendation, schools should not be discriminating people on race or their protected characteristics. So there's that, really. But yeah, you've mentioned that. So I think we'll go to the next question.
School governors is the other one that I forgot as well. Yeah. So in addition to school councils, anyone can, pretty much anyone can become a school governor as well. Nice. So that's another way. The governors are in charge of the school's governance and hold the head teacher and the leadership team to account. So that's somebody else that, the governing board of a school that parents could go to if they feel the head teacher is not taking the issue seriously enough.
Nice.
Like in that school, for example.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Kadra. If you are comfortable, can you please share some of your experiences in where your innocence and your independence were robbed as a young Black person?
Yeah, definitely. I think mine's been interesting being the daughter of migrants. So I was born here. I guess, is that second generation? I never really know.
I don't know. Is it first generation? I think so.
I never really know.
Because I'm the same. I was born here.
Okay, I always get it wrong.
I don't know. Someone let us know in the comments.
Yeah, one of these generations. And obviously, there's a whole movement, actually, shout out to Homegirls Unite, about being the eldest daughter of immigrant parents. And that automatically kind of robs you of your innocence.
Yeah.
Not blaming my parents, but I think obviously being newly arrived in the country just before I was born, they're focusing on trying to establish themselves, settle in, acclimatize, learn the language, all of these things, right? And over time, whilst doing that, and I became older, it's kind of oh, can you help with this? Can you help with that? Can you da-da-da-da-da?
It's true.
And I have 3 younger siblings who I love, but I had to babysit them a lot
and
do all that kind of stuff and help out with picking up from school. Because especially a lot of migrant families face, financial pressures, all these kind of other barriers that they sometimes have to rely on their networks or on their children to provide that caring support and stuff like that. So not at all to blame my parents for that experience, because we had to do what we had to do to survive at that time. But, you don't have that normal childhood. They did the best they could all the time. And obviously did amazing stuff family trips and stuff like that too, to compensate for it. But still, it was okay, it's my friends didn't have to leave school and go and pick up their brother from school. They could just go straight to the parks.
Literally, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So those kind of experiences, which I think a lot of us may share within the Black and within the diaspora community generally.
100%.
Right? So those kind of things, I guess, for me. And then, like I said, in school and all of that, it wasn't really a problem that for me.
Yes.
Because it was quite diverse. And I think they, in my primary school assemblies, we used to sing Destiny's Child every day. We used to come to school.
You're so
and
lucky.
This old white man who was our music teacher would be playing it on the guitar and we would be singing I'm a Survivor every day.
I love
And we had a white head teacher and everything. That's how it was.
That's an affirmation.
I feel like it was quite promoting positive Black childhood in those settings.
Yeah.
Now that I reflect on it. So that was nice.
I mean, that is nice. And thank you for sharing that experience. Again, we've spoken about adultification. Again, please go and check out Janine Davis's work. Again, Kadra and I, amazing. She's amazing. We met her very briefly, but again, very warm spirit, very good aura. So all of the good things there. I guess in terms of talking about this question, I looked at it in terms of, from the direction of, we've spoken a lot about Blackness being likened to violence, but on the other hand, we look at the marrying of innocence to whiteness. And, again, talking about representation, this larger question that we're trying to answer today, the role of media representation in portraying innocence as well. And I want to talk about Lucy Letby. But before I do that, I want to issue another disclaimer here in this space. this case has already seen a legal conclusion. Okay, so that's the first thing. I'm offering my opinion, but importantly, actually, I do offer my sincere condolences to the families that have been affected and that have been impacted, and of course, understand the family's right to privacy. Nor would I expect them to identify themselves. So, in that being said, I really wanted to identify how in the Lucy Letby case, for instance, when everything was kicking off and sort of first starting off, there's so much statistics that look at the likelihood of young Black mothers dying in childbirth, but also the likelihood of Black children that are born and are in the care of, I want to say please people listen well.
I mean, it is white doctors. You don't even need to say some, because the data compares white doctors and Black doctors.
That's true. So thank you for that. But statistically speaking, Black children or Black babies that are born in the custody of white doctors are more likely to die. And of course, in the case of Lucy Letby, the families, of course, with their right to privacy, have been made anonymous, and the victims, of course, understandably. But in all of this, I was thinking it'd be interesting to understand the ethnic, makeup of all of the victims' families. In the conversation of Innocence, did Lucy Letby take out her vile actions on more children of colour? Did she spread them out? But my point being in all of this is that, the murder should have never happened in the first place. And again, may the souls of all of those that have passed rest in peace. But in looking at the media representation of whiteness and innocence, we saw a lot of, the doctor that got her like that, exposed her, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, a South Asian doctor, the way that he was vilified, had made to write a letter of apology. Lucy Letby, it was reported that she got a fully funded academic course, which in my knowledge of certain workplaces, a letter of apology is asking for Santa to come home.
Yeah.
That's unheard of. And of course, we saw a lot of, what does she look like? You never expect Lucy to look like that. What does a child serial killer look like? And I'm thinking, what do you want a child serial killer to look like? Do you want it to ascribe to your own bias and your own representation of a child serial killer or of criminality? And that in question brings in the politics of representation. I will talk a bit about representation in a bit more detail. But it's a theory developed by Dr. Stuart Hall, a British Jamaican scholar. And basically, to really shorten it here, looks at, basically Stuart Hall defines representation as the production of meaning through language, through systems of images, objects, events, and languages. And of course, back onto the Lucy Letby piece, if we're taught to understand through images and language that white, both the colour and skin colour, are equivalent to purity, and that conversely, black and brown colours are tarnishes, so to speak, and opposite to the symbolism of purity, then that becomes, of course, the socially dominant way of thinking. And of course, despite our own experiences and interpretations of the world, I think that is probably one of the most powerful examples of representation in the media, so to speak, and also as a contemporary piece that's going on at the moment. I think it's really insane. And of course, with the power of representation, how we all interpret that as Black women, how we interpret the crimes of Lucy Letby. Several Black women have come online and spoken truth to power in that piece. However, presenting their own experience and their own knowledge. But of course, the system of racism has meant that they've been the receivers of the vitriol of abuse. Do you know what I mean? Which I think is insane, which I think is stupid. And I think considering the way that Innocence is portrayed, considering the fact that the so-called symbolism of purity created or did such a unthinkable act, and Black women are talking about that act, the vilification has gone to a completely different direction. It just... Yeah.
Even the images of actual victims of crime, for example, or death. What are the images that get chosen of them? It's them that one time they took a photo in a hoodie. Oh, look, it looks like they deserve to die.
All the goofy photos. They are
actually innocent.
Yes.
And they still get portrayed as a criminal.
Yeah.
Even when they're dead.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean? It's so true.
That's that stark contrast, like you say. But
such a contrast.
The media know what they're doing around
They know what they're doing. They're doing. So this moves us swiftly on to instinct, the instinct piece of this episode. So instinct is defined as because, again, going back to the definition that we shared this morning, today, the way that people, animals naturally react or behave without thinking, without having to think or learn about it. So that's a definition. And of course, in the socialization of Black youth, they are often linked to criminality, as we've already discussed, as an instinct rather than a product of institutional and systemic racism. How does the school to pipeline theory or work support this claim?
No, definitely. I would say, actually, for me, the instinct to act is like a psychosomatic kind of symptom. And like, we've been doing quite a lot of work around like the links between behavior and mental health in schools, just because the government at the moment, they have been pushing this whole agenda around zero tolerance approaches to bad behavior. Or since the pandemic, children's behavior has worsened and they need to be like worked back into shape going back to school. I don't know if you've seen even all the stuff around like attendance and like lots of children struggling to go back to school since the pandemic and stuff. But really, like all these things, like even for adults, the behaviors or the misbehavior, quote unquote, that children display, it's all trying to tell you something. There's something beneath the surface, whether it's trauma, they're trying to communicate some sort of need. It might be undiagnosed special educational needs, SEND, and all these kind of other things that it's a cry for help for them rather than them actually just misbehaving for no reason. Do you know what I mean? Like children are not born inherently bad or evil and stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's always, they've either learned the behavior from the context of the households they're in or something. Like there's something behind it that should be investigated at the least. Of course, anyone can be cheeky and mess about and stuff. And sometimes we know that. But even that is developmentally appropriate for children. Why are we expecting 7-year-olds to behave like an adult?
It's true.
Do you know what I mean? So those things, like in terms of instinct, again, you have to take that developmental approach. Because the instinct for a 3-year-old would be to put their hand on the stove and know that. If you've not had the experience, you won't know, right? So those are the things that, for me, have been worrying me in school settings, because we know who does it impact the most when we're trying to restrict those instincts, right?
That's true.
Black and disproportionately traveller children as well in school settings. And obviously the school to prison pipeline, I think was a concept developed in the States as well. It was, And like they talk about actually, it's not even school per se, but it's school exclusion, right? So all those young people who are pushed out of the education system, seen as bad, whatever, are left to their own devices without support in the community, without education. And especially in the UK anyway, there's been a growing focus on like criminal exploitation. Like how those children who are then not in school are then being groomed by gangs and stuff. I think sometimes that is seen as the main picture when it's not just that. There's lots of other stuff going on too. But yes, some young men especially are coerced into like getting into criminal exploitation and that kind of stuff. And then that leads them to criminality and being arrested. And that's how the pipeline goes. But of course, if you don't give people good housing, good education, good jobs, all these kind of other stuff, what else? Like, what else can they do to
where can
make
they
a living?
go? Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
Again, and like, again, shout out to No More Exclusions. It's an amazing organization that's led by a teacher and a young person with their own lived experience of being excluded and ending up in the system themselves. And they said most of the young people they spoke to had been excluded from school. So there's a strong connection. The data just proves it as well. So but again, keeping children in school helps reduce the numbers of young people ending up in the criminal justice system. Is a no-brainer. So we need to fix the school system. Like what can we do to make it more inclusive, more engaging for young people?
I agree.
That's the answer. But I think it seems like it's the hard thing to do.
Whereas
exclusion is easy to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Dismissive again. Could we please get the Google results of instinct, please? So actually, funny enough, when I typed in instinct for Black youth, this thing came up. I typed in instinct Black youth, instinct for Black youth. This was the first thing that came up. I don't know if it was some...
And the questions are interesting too.
Questions are very interesting, but like...
Why is it all about, the first two?
But by black men. Like, I don't understand it. Very interesting, but also like, I don't want to buy your ish. Next picture, please. So I had to scroll a bit further down. And again, you see, well, following on from the questions, you know, the representation that is shown of black young people and their quote unquote instinct. And again, I touched on this very briefly, but the theory of representation by Jamaican British historian Stuart Hall, who's as a politics and international relations graduate, I had to familiarize myself with him. So it's kind of like going back the memory lane with him. But again, I've mentioned about, the politics of representation and what that is in essence. But, his theory is understood as exposing and critiquing the representation of gender, race and class in the mass media versus the lived experience and the reality of gender, race and class that we see in the day-to-day. So like when I say day-to-day, I mean the disparities that we see in these different social categorizations as such. So, for instance, crime, we've seen crime racialized, but you see, with gender issues, we see a patriarchal lens on that piece as well. But Stuart Hall argued that the media that we consume, of course, is not to be trusted. But before the right-wingers say fake news, we're talking about the purposeful disinformation that's being shared about these, very important issues. And, it kind of throws me back to Dominic Samuels. Last week, she did like a tweet expose, if you want to call it that, where she, exposed that the Daily Mail came to her to write an anti-black piece on Carnival, and she just stood up and said no and wanted to bring light to it. But it's like, I'm so sorry. Excuse me. Of course, people can change their perspectives and learn, do what they need to do. But, okay, if you are someone who has been represented and has been a beacon for anti-black rhetoric, I don't want to speak for her, but if you are representing that image for right-wingers, for racists, and then you turn around and say, actually, I stood up and I said no, that doesn't do anything for us, because the representation in the media is already out there. You've enabled that. You've supported that. You've sat there for how long? It was only until Notting Hill Carnival that you said, I can't do this, which I thought.
Do you want a cookie?
Do you not like? Oh my God, well done! You're one of us. You're kinfolk now. Fantastic. Yeah. Like, what do you want from us? Like, it makes no sense.
No, because white supremacy will use you until it needs to use you, and then expend you, literally,
and dump you like nothing.
That's what's happened. Now, when the chickens come home to roost,
do you know what I mean? Like, it's a bit of a sticky one. But again, I don't think it needs to be explained to not trust the. I don't think it's rocket science to think that we can't really trust the media outlets that we use. But in that being said, I want to talk about. Oh, that is powerful.
It is very loud.
Do you want to use mine?
Ooh, no, don't worry.
It's fine. Like it's quiet.
Oh, thank you.
Bless you.
Nice and gentle.
Bless you. But, we've spoken a lot about criminalisation, but, government action, again, instinct. So with government action against the, black youth, we see action against, music genres and self-expression. With drill music, we've seen that, sensationalized as, the catalyst for knife crime in the UK. And of course, with that government action, we've seen, gang injunctions, we've seen bans on drill music videos. Concerts as well, certain artists being banned from performing, which I think is absolutely insane. But then in the same breath, the government, and to quote Matt Hancock directly, has the audacity to say that they're a fan of drill music. How can you be a fan of something that your government are intrinsically silencing? How can you sit there and acknowledge the power of, one art form from Black British culture that is putting the UK on the fucking map? How can you do that? How can you flip-flop?
Because he can understand, for him, listening to it doesn't affect his behaviour, but that doesn't apply to us.
Say that again. Say that again. Say that again.
So I'm saying, not specifically singling him out, but I'm just saying, certain people, white people in positions of power, feel they can listen to it and have that music and lyrics not influence their behaviour, but black young people can't. They're incapable. Sorry, I listen to rap, I listen to all this stuff. It does not affect my behaviour. I know, yes, sometimes there are some problematic lyrics and confessing to murders and stuff like that. Probably not a wise idea.
Not a wise idea.
But, there's things like that, we could reconsider and also think about positive, messaging. But just to demonize
Yeah.
it altogether,
Yeah.
I think is very reductive.
And to think that you're seeing so much income, we're seeing so many new cultural, what's the word, like highlights, like people in our culture, in our community that we can say, oh my God, this person's doing so well and they're doing their thing. But to go through all of that and have that recognition, to have that be, again, another art form that is internationally recognized, this is something that's putting the UK on the map. You're benefiting from this, but at the same time, in the same breath, in fact, you're criminalizing it. Like, make that make sense. It doesn't sit well with me. Like, we've spoken about, schools prison pipeline, as you've just, explained very, very aptly, actually, access to, employment, access to housing. So, with cuts to government spending, in an article by The Guardian published in 2022, 90% of schools will have no money in 2023. Now, in 2023, in an article by Innocence, government cuts to schooling means that a pupil who would have started school in 2010 will have lost out on £5,384 of education funding by the time that they graduate sixth form this year. So that's like, what? How? But with that being said, with housing, with youth homelessness, we have 9.7 people who are homeless and applying for help are Black. However, Black people only make up 3.5% of British households. We're talking about funding, local councils. British City Council announced bankruptcy a year ago, which in my view, I think is a snowfall.
This week.
Birmingham,
yeah.
Was it this week? A week ago?
Yeah.
Wow. Time really does fly. But I think, in my opinion, that's only going to be a snowball effect of many different local authorities. And Birmingham are Europe's largest local authority.
And youngest, I think. Or
And
is it
youngest.
One of the two.
Damn. One of the two. But if you think about Birmingham, for example, that city, think about free school meals, extracurricular activities, access to them. What does that mean? So I looked at an article from The Guardian in 2018, which looked at, I think it's on here. Yes, it's the top search of the screenshot that I shared, where a few Black and mixed race, like Afro-Caribbean mixed heritage people came in and shared their lived experience of trying to find employment. So one person called Connor Robinson from South Croydon said, and I quote, "I think white people are stereotyping towards me because I'm brown. They think I'm a rude boy or gangster." And another person called Deji Adoshun, youth worker, says, and I quote, "A lot of young Black men, especially in Hackney, one of the things that puts them off for applying for certain jobs is a sense that you need to be posh or well-spoken." So it's, again, like it's stuff that we're already saying that's being confirmed, but I think it's so, that was in 2018, by the way, we're in 2023. So to think and say the things that we're saying now, which relate to things that, has been shared by these people, is insane.
Even worse. Since the pandemic, cost of living crisis,
oh my God.
All of that. Fewer opportunities.
It's true. Oh my God. And then finally, in terms of employment, I looked at a 2020 report published by the Office of National Statistics. For those who don't know, they are the organisation that are responsible for the census, which, tracks the UK population. So I believe we're currently at 67 million people in the UK. But they did a 2020 report on ethnic youth economic activity, and they studied between 2011 and 2020. Now, when I was going through this research, they had all of the different ethnic minority backgrounds information readily available and accessible. But when it came to white youth, they redacted, in all of the years from 2011 to 2020, they redacted the numbers of white people and white youth in employment, which I thought was really, really interesting. So between 2019 and 2020, 110,000 Black, African, Caribbean and mixed heritage people between 18 and 25 were in employment, with 32,000 conversing unemployment. Between 2017 to 2018, 98,000 Black, Afro-Caribbean and mixed heritage between 18 and 25 were in employment, with 23,000 being in unemployment. Now, in the data that I looked at together, Black youths were were the highest represented for being in employment, which was great to see. But amongst the highest that were, I'm amongst the lowest in unemployment. Actually, no. In fact, let me go back on myself. White youth between 18 to 25 and 2019 to 2020 were the highest recorded demographic in unemployment at 310,000. So again, bearing in mind that we don't know because it was redacted how much are in employment, I don't think it gives us a sufficient enough sort of like overview, but I think the redaction in itself is a statement in itself. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So again, looking at all of those bits and pieces are sort of jarring, and thinking back to what the educational secretary said this week, you know, are we meant to say, we're meant to say thank you for doing a fucking good job? Can the fucking good job in the room please stand up? Like, can it stand up? Because how are we talking about these disparities and you're here huffing and puffing because what? After a £32 million renovation, you can't seem to think about how your policies are disadvantaging other people. Anyways, that's by the by. But a final bit to leave on the note of instinct is the word democide, which defined by Collins Dictionary is the killing of members of a country's civilian population as a result of its government's policy, including by direct action, indifference and neglect. And, you know, this, I think all of this that we've discussed is a form of democide, but I say apt. Yeah. Another example of democide that you could look at is the government's neglect in handling the coronavirus pandemic, which resulted to over 200,000 deaths. So, you know, different stroke, but I hope that pieces it all together. So, in reclaiming the discourse about Black youth, how should, in that case, instinct be redefined? Because as we've said today, it's not innate for Black youth to be criminal. It's not innate for Black people as a whole to be defined as angry. And there are some testimonies of Black youth who have been able to survive the schools to prison pipeline, for instance.
Against all the odds.
Against all the odds.
Yeah, which is amazing. So it makes me think of like resilience, for example, as the word, which often the way that it's used, I don't really like it because it's kind of like such in a deficit-based way. You either have or don't have resilience. If only you had a bit more resilience, you could deal with life's ills and all that.
It's
kind
like,
of
what about mental
stuff,
health?
Just like, I'm like, but actually that is resilience. When we've been able to withstand so much oppression, discrimination, all these kind of stuff. So that to me is something to like think about, that, you know, they persevere despite all these like odds against them. And for me anyway, all these things are just words. It's the behaviors that sit behind them that matter the most.
100%.
So even when we get caught up in like terminology to do with race and stuff like that, I'm like, if you're not committed to tackling the entrenched issue and inequality, then it doesn't matter what word you use, you know? And again, ultimately, like where we want to get to is where all children, including Black children, thrive, live happy lives, have the best start to life. Right? So they're equipped with that support from their family, from schools, from all these settings. They have the tools in their toolbox to become whoever they want to be. Do you know what I mean? That's the ultimate sort of like goal for me. But instinct, independence, innocence, all of these things should still exist in that way. Like they form part of the toolbox, and they're things that young people can draw on as and when they need it. Do you know what I mean? But
point.
like if you're just limited to a certain selection of choices and options and behaviors, then that limits you know, your development as a young person, and just feels like, you know, I think, is it also because I studied sociology in college?
Nice.
So Paul Gilroy, who talked about self-fulfilling prophecy again. So if we keep embedding all these things about,
that's new.
This is how you're going to be, you know, you're going to end up fulfilling all those negative stereotypes and depictions of yourself, right?
Wow.
I think it is. Hopefully I didn't misquote that. But
wow, that's interesting though.
Over 15 years ago.
I love that though. Thank you for that. I think, you know, just to add on to what you've shared without repeating what we've discussed really, like, I think in redefining instinct, I think one of my issues is that we don't have a diverse representation of, you know, role models, you know, or social networks for us to really be able to, you know, break ground, there we go, in certain industries. Like, you know, for instance, the music industry, I think, is pretty much dominated by Black folk, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. But, you know,
but not in positions of power, though.
Ooh. So
that's the thing. There's artists, but then you hear about a lot of them. Even Ray recently, who was talking about Mahalia and their contracts they've been in.
That's so true.
You know, so they get used still.
Oh my God, that's actually a really good point.
So yeah, visibility doesn't equate to like power.
It really doesn't. It doesn't. And with that being said, I was trying to look at, you know, instincts. You know, these people keep saying, oh, you know, people get out the hood, like, you know, why can't you? And all that bullshit. In a 2018 article, I tried to look for more contemporary information, but still, there are no Black CEOs in the UK's top 100 biggest corporations, which I think is insane. Now there's like a commitment to having like one person from an ethnic minority in the boardroom or whatever, but I think it's still quite telling of itself. And of course, in relation to what I mentioned in question 5 about, the breaking of self-esteem and redirecting career paths and options and stuff like that. We see that in terms of like instinct and even in employment, we see that, again, that disparity in, a lot of Black people in research given by the trade union. The trade union umbrella body, the TUC, this is coming from the Voice newspaper. Black and minority ethnic people are in insecure work, and insecure work is defined as low pay and variable hours and fewer rights and protection for workers. Coming from 360,000 in 2011, that skyrocketed to 836,340 in 2022. So, again, just to simplify that, because I really went around, ring a roses. 836 people, 836,000 people in 2022 Black people are in insecure work, which I think is, again, telling of the system that we have in itself.
And that relates to COVID excess deaths as well, right?
That's so true,
that gig economy being, in those kind of like frontline jobs most of the time, which they tend to be.
Yes, that's so true. So true. But to answer the question as well on my side, I think instinct for Black youth needs to be redefined outside of the criminalisation that's attributed to Blackness. I think that, instinct needs to be redefined, acknowledging the achievements, as in really acknowledging the achievements of those that have broken wind. Yeah. And I think industry power, but that comes with collectivization. And I think that's a huge conversation that we need to have in our community as a whole. Maybe we can have it on this podcast one day, but I think that's one thing we need to, as a community, come together and say, like, let's strategize, let's have our own industries, let's have our own empires, And I guess an example of I guess, a role model in the Black community is, Stormzy. Big up Stormzy. I'm manifesting a collaboration with you. It's going to happen. But, Stormzy's scholarship fund for Black students going to Oxbridge, that's significant piece of work, actually. Of course, we got the what about white people, but again, having that scholarship fund to support Black students who we've spoken about for how long now, the disproportionate disadvantages that they face, I think is incredible, because to have someone in a high position of power such as Stormzy provide access and a pathway to for us, to Black people, to access high levels of academia such as Oxbridge, I think is insane, and I think it's great, and I believe that it's
not just handing them those Oxford or Cambridge degrees.
Yeah.
They obviously worked for it.
They worked for it.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's the picture people give, like, no, they still have to get the grades.
They worked
to get
for
in,
it.
So
it's
they deserve it.
They deserve it 100%. So I think, that's amazing. And that's one example. And I believe that one day we will get there, where we have that empire, we have that collectivization. And I believe we should definitely take back sovereignty in that piece. So my next question for you is, generational trauma is an unfortunate experience in the Black community. Whether it's experienced personally or as a witness, there is a law attached to the way that we Black youths communicate unity and protect ourselves from harm. Aquaman, I'm saying trying to really get the accent on Aquaman. Aquaman, the 16-year-old, who I'll keep anonymous, instinctively jumped in the water to defend the captain assaulted by the white mobsters at the Battle of Montgomery, which we've just mentioned earlier today, which was actually, at the time of today's filming, a month ago today. Do you feel that Aquaman's actions were an act or a commentary on the generational trauma that we can experience in our community?
Oh, 100%. And like, again, we've already touched on fight or flight. And it's actually, research has shown that like Black babies are born with high levels of cortisol, which is the hormone for fight or flight, right? Wow. Then compared to white babies. So even from birth, when we talk about intergenerational, it's actually intergenerational from the womb. Do you know what I mean? And that gets passed on. It's like generations and generations of racial trauma and stress, impacting our physiological kind of development, for example. Yeah. So that in itself already innately, and like navigating predominantly white spaces, you're always on high alert, right? High stress. and like what can we do to support each other, because I guess that was his instinct, was just to, you need to act fast, and like everyone got in formation, and it was beautiful.
Everybody got in formation. It was,
you know what I mean? So
unity.
And you know, I think we could take that further, because there are some instances where that doesn't happen. That was the example that was filmed where it did happen. But there's other instances where I think some of us have internalized that divide and rule mentality, and then we recreate it within our own communities. And sometimes we self-destruct ourselves.
We do,
We don't even need
that
when we're talking about this whole situation, the instinct can even be to like self-corrupt in that sense, which is just like very sad, and it happens. And that's why your call for like that collective action and having conversations about it is so necessary. Because even though we're talking about Blackness and Black British, it's still not a defined thing in my point of view. Like who defines what that is? And it's been evolving over time. And like obviously there's different waves of like Black communities in the UK. It's not necessarily a shared experience, is it? Do you know what I mean? So I think there's so many things that we can kind of do to like unpack that a bit more, but it definitely was. And you know, let's hope it teaches that community a lesson. And especially happening in Montgomery, where there was the bus boycotts, right? And all that kind of stuff. So it's very symbolic of that generational trauma in that particular community, fighting for justice. So, you know, the Black people of Montgomery,
they did their bits. More power to you. More power to you. Everything that you said about Aquaman. So Aquaman actually defined Aquaman. Let me not get sued by DC.
The dictionary, are you going to tell us?
It is, it's in the Urban Dictionary. So it's defined as the unlikely Black superhero. That's what comes up when you type in Aquaman. It's a punny take on the DC. That's actually so jokes. On the on the DC superhero Aquaman. So I'm very pleased to say that the family of attackers have been arrested and have been charged with federal hate crimes. So again, a month to today's recording, August the 8th, 2023 was the day that white folks learnt that Black folks can swim, and importantly that a white folding chair became the symbol of Black resistance, which I thought was amazing. So I'm going to sort of speed through, but there was another angle on generation trauma that I wanted to sort of like touch on, and that is like, you know, in the home and around abuse in the home. And I saw a TikTok, because I think, you know, the home environment can really impact, you know, going to school and, you know, growing up as a young person, you know, that adultification piece. I'm an eldest child, like all of that and how that can take place and how that can shape someone is really important. And I saw a TikTok by someone called Dr. Chanda. Their handle is @paging.dr.chanda, where she stitched a video about someone like a Black woman sort of giving their commentary on where like parents discipline their children, which is a term that we hear a lot in our community, unfortunately. And how in the original video before the stitch, that disciplining a child is the most whitest thing that you can do. And Dr. Chanda stitched it and spoke about, you know, how that in reference to discipline, when it's rooted in violence, the same violence that was inflicted on, you know, our ancestors, you know, which was to destroy their sense of identity, to destroy their literal bodies, you know, to destroy their trust. That is the whitest thing that you can do, because you're repeating that generational trauma. And of course, she in that stitch cited generational trauma, which I was like, there we go, it's linked. You know, in a 2021 study by gov.uk, Black children made up 7% of looked after children and 2% of those adopted. And again, looking at the topics of, you know, the role of culture and race, adequate support for Black looked after children and adopted children should be addressed, and it will be addressed in a different time on this episode, because I think that's a different conversation for a different day. I have an amazing
suggestion for a guest for that, by the way.
Oh, okay, we'll talk offline.
We will.
Yes. I need to stop. Pinky doll, please don't come for me. But I guess like my response to the question in terms of generational trauma, I kind of wanted to open up a little bit, because like for me personally, you know, I'm a care leaver, and that particular that particular experience, for me, navigating my emotions, my feelings, my actions, my relationship with people and institutions, and of course the adultification and, as an eldest daughter, taking on so much responsibility, really impacted my own youth. So it meant that I had to become an adult very, very, very young, and very, very quickly. And we've spoken about Janine Davis and her incredible research, but she cites another scholar called D.L. Stevens, who says, and I'm going to quote here, children living in homes where domestic violence is present are more likely to be adultified both within the home and externally. And Janine Davis continues and says that, the potential implications for the vulnerability of the child often are overlooked, leaving them more at risk because there's a presumed sense of independence. And when I looked at Dr. Chandler's TikTok, actually, I don't know, it was kind of like, oh wow, hit home a little bit, because again I'm hearing about generational trauma in one form, and I guess it affirmed my own choices in regards to future generations and all that ish. And as a care leaver, I'm grateful and lucky enough to have had the experience that I've had through the care system, and that I'm a survivor of what me and my younger siblings went through before moving into our foster family, really. And that's that, to be honest with you. And I think, that this is a great time to identify that, again, with the piece of intersectionality, that this is my personal lived experience against social structures such as, racism and misogyny. When I think about my instinct, independence and innocence. And again, young Black people will have different feelings about being in the care system and different identities and all that ish with being in that and in likeness to their own identities, their own innocence, instinct and independence. And yeah, that's it really. Watch this space. There'll be more to it, but I just thought that piece was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's
okay.
So much to unpack in that
oh my gosh.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think for me, anyway, again, white supremacy is so part of the care system itself as well.
Oh my God.
Again, I worked in one of the wealthiest local authorities once upon a time.
Wow.
And again, it was the small minority of racialized communities who faced the most interventions from children's services. But it was actually there were so many white rich children experiencing neglect that the authority never cared about.
Mad.
Because the parents are rich and they've got, they can speak to, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I'm okay, they are left to their own devices all weekend. Is that normal?
It's not normal, no.
So, there's a lot.
There's so much.
Looking forward to that conversation.
Thank you. So that leads us to our final question around the 3 I's, which is, how can we, Black youth, restore our innocence, how can we, Black youth, restore innocence and independence and therefore live joyful and fulfilling lives outside of the social representation of Black youth? Can I get the screenshot of the just the independent screenshots, please? Thank you. I'll go to your reflections.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? There's so many things that I could say in response to this question. And I think really it's about Black young people finding the spaces where and cultivating those spaces where they find joy, right? Whatever that looks like for themselves. For queer Black young people, it could be going to Black Pride and creating offshoot kind of events from that. Do you know what I mean? It's just whatever brings you joy, trying to find ways of protecting and nurturing that, I would say. And then related to that, I guess, connecting and getting into active campaigning or peer support with other like-minded people as well. So again, I think often when we think about action, we think about areas where there's predominantly Black people, but there's Black people in rural areas, and what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, it's true.
Even when we ran a program, there was literally a young woman from somewhere in remote Scotland who got in touch, and she was like, how can I connect with you guys? Because I have no one. I'm I'm the only Black person in this whole village. And I was like, oh my God. So again, I think we need to expand those horizons, thinking outside of just urban spaces, because that's not, again, representation of what it means to be Black British, right? We need to include those people in it. So I think, I would like to see just more collective and open conversations that are also productive, not talking about the same who pays on a first date conversations and all that kind of stuff that
It's
we
true.
see on social media platforms. Like, this stuff isn't productive, okay?
Yeah,
So like,
yeah.
let's think about the things that actually matter, like what you're trying to do with this podcast stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear what you think as well.
Yes. I think for me, relating back to what I've literally just mentioned not long ago, sovereignty, we need that as a community. We really need to collectivize because there's so much talent, so much potential, and having that sovereignty to reinvest into ourselves, I think we can have truthful and constructive conversations in our community as a whole. Resistance. I'm a very big Capricorn. So don't tell me what to do because I'm not doing it. So we are, taking away. I'm a Capricorn. I'm proud of it. If you haven't noticed, but with resistance, I'm a very big person of like, if something doesn't look right or sound right, challenge it. And I think for us, resistance, for us Black people, Black young people, I feel like it's become a pillar in our community. Challenging the socially dominant order of white supremacy and a systemic subordination. I watched Kelechi's Say Your Mind latest episode. If you haven't, please watch, support the baby girl Kelechi Okafor.
Yes, please do.
Say Your Mind, her
Amazing
podcast,
pod.
Insane. But I was watching her most recent episode where she was had an interview with a redneck called Crash, and she asked him a question about what does it mean when racists or racists come in their sort of hives and attack Black people for speaking truth to power. Like what does that, what's the message behind that? And Crash said it's a message to say know your place, which when I heard Crash say that, I was like, whoa, like it really blew me aback because I was like, that's it. Sure. That's where the whole socioeconomic framework comes in because of course, if you're subduing us, that is keeping us in our place. This is the same country that's saying we're the pioneers of abolishing slavery, by the way. Please, let's put the
and the Caribbean experience as slavery.
Do you know what I mean? But
the thing is, like, for resistance, for me, it's not, it doesn't always have to be in the form of a march or a protest, right? Resistance can look like anything. It can be creative arts. It can be, do you know what I mean?
This is my resistance.
Napping. The nap ministry exists. There's so many different things, literally.
Like, so many ways to do so. But I think that's one way. Re-education, showing the stats that we've both shared today, a lot of the stuff I had to research and find out, and I'm pretty sure not a lot of people know that. And again, I think for us as a community, having those constructive conversations, educating ourselves, it's clear the curriculum doesn't want to do that. So us having that knowledge in that, again, I think it was Michael Foucault, my degree coming in handy again, who said knowledge is power. So, having that access to knowledge is going to be, again, transformational for us. And finally, redefining joy. We've spoken about this, there's a pain in the experience of racism, and that's the pain that we all share in the diaspora, no matter how old you are. And I think, redefining joy allows us to become part of, allows us, I believe, to redefine the words innocence, instinct, and independence for us as a community, for Blackness and for, the representation of Black youth. And to end on a quote, this is a quote from Chantal Joseph. She says, and I quote, "Black joy is not found in the absence of pain and suffering. It exists through it." So,
I love that.
Do you know what I mean? It's cute. So that's that really. So wow, we've gone through a belter of an episode.
We have on a very hot day as well.
I hope you're not hearing the fan going off in these mics.
Hear mine.
Because
very loud.
That's a motor. And the thing is, she's got a very small fan. If you're watching, you can see the size difference. God. It's insane.
I bought it in Peckham Market. Sorry.
Oh, that's the punch in Peckham Market. That's the South London coming out. But yeah. So to end this on a we're ending on a positive note, anyways. But you've heard Kadra and I dissect at large how innocence, instinct, and independence, both in the literal definition and statistic evidence shown, highlight the injustice, and disparities faced by Black youth. Of course, this impacts the ways that we are seen, heard, and understood in our society. Systemic oppression charted to subdue the progress of the Black youth and our right to education and a fulfilling life. You've heard our personal experiences, including some from other people that we've shared about, who've shared their own personal experiences. So, to end the podcast, amongst the discussion, the answer to today's big question, and just to remind you all, the question was, the lived experiences of racism and the representation of Black youths mean that they are stripped of their innocence prematurely and true socio-economic independence, which can mean that their instincts are survival in a fundamentally racist, heteropatriarchal world. How can we truly protect the innocence and independence of Black youth? Well, listeners, the answer has to that question and is yet to be confirmed. So before we wrap up, I'm so happy. Before we wrap up, Kadra, please let the people know what mental health resources that people can be signposted to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say, firstly, there's this really great platform that was created recently by the Ubele Initiative, and mine is called Bayo, Bayo. This is a platform that tries to bring together all the Black mental health and wellbeing organizations and support services out there.
Nice.
And I think you can just put in your postcode and it tells you what's in your area.
Oh,
so
fabulous.
Amazing. So, but to give specific examples, there's like Black Minds Matter, which offer free therapy, I think up to 3 sessions for Black people who need support. There's the Black African and Asian Therapy Network, where if you were specifically looking for a person of colour to be your therapist, you can find them up on there. A charity I work with, Young Minds, they've got some really amazing resources as well around racism and mental health, and some advice for young people directly. And then I mentioned Kids of Colour as well. If you're up in the North, amazing organisation too. So there's lots, but check out Bayo for like a more extensive list, I would say.
Thank you so much, Kadra. And again, you're getting the creme de la creme of mental health experience.
Something like that.
No, please. So please take
I don't know
on...
if you can call it that.
Yes, I can. So please take on Kadra's recommendations. A couple that I have here are the Forefront Project. So that this is a youth organisation fronted and founded by Temi Mwale, who's doing incredible work right now with the Chris Kaba campaign at the moment. But the Forefront Project is a youth organisation that supports people to reimagine peace and justice and bringing healing to the forefront. So at Forefront, they believe in centering healing and practice transformative justice whilst challenging the UK's, and they say, addiction to criminalisation, which we've mentioned today. So check them out. Also, BLAM, it says, BLAM UK. So that stands for Black Learning, Achievement and Mental Health. They have a range of wellness therapy, wellness programs, school education programs for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 pupils, including mental health resources and more. Check them out. We also have blackyouthproject.com. So they are a media outlet where they have varying pieces and perspectives on gender, sexuality, and lived experience. And finally, Black Send Mamas UK. I did an Instagram live with the CEO, I've mentioned this already, of Black Send Mamas UK, Marsha Martin. Again, big shout out to you. Hi, hope you're okay. You can find the podcast actually on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also I will provide another link to donate to Black Send Mamas UK. But who are they? So they are a national support group and informational hub whose ultimate goal is to improve Black mothers' access to special educational needs and disabilities provisions for their children, as well as necessary assistance for themselves during their parenting journey. Of course, they also see the clear difference in outcomes for Black mothers trying to get the right support for themselves as they face barriers that we've discussed today, being judged, overlooked, stereotyped, and the such. Black Send Mamas UK provide regular support, group sessions through informative discussions and panel talks, through all things Black mental health, Black motherhood and Black neurodivergence, psychotherapist-led workshops on nutrition and gut healing for better mental health courses, and one-to-one psychotherapy. Pardon me, so sorry about that. And counselling programs. And regular mummy meetups and mummy's nights out, which is quite nice for those of you who have children. Black Mama also provide brunches and wellness retreats, as well as various manner of special educational need activities and events for and advocacy for send children on behalf of their mothers or carers. So again, amazing organisation. Please check that out. We're wrapping up now. So please tell the people a word of encouragement, where to find you, how to keep supporting you and the incredible work that you do.
Yeah, well, keep supporting this pod, first of all, because it's fantastic and very informative, and you will learn lots and change the world as a result.
Thank you.
And then I would say, in terms of where you can find the Centre for Mental Health, you can kind of just Google us, centreformentalhealth.org.uk. .co.uk, I think is the website.
Yes.
I haven't typed it in such a long time. Anyway,
Yes.
so I think that, and
I think
then
that's it,
I'm on Twitter at Kadra, Kadra_A__. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you're on there, I'm not the greatest on LinkedIn, but people seem to
I
add
don't
me
use
on
it.
I
I get weirded out by that. I'm like, if I don't know you,
I mean,
why?
I've had good connections through it, from people, but I just don't post that much.
Fair. I don't really either.
I should do more. But yeah, that's where you can find us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And my final word to you all is this. So context, I was watching The Handmaid's Tale a long time ago, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone, so I'm not going to say too much. But there's a really important plot line with Offred. And she says the phrase, "They do not own you, they do not own who you'll become." And that has stuck with me ever since. If you have watched it and you know the phrase, you know what I mean. And that's a very powerful scene as well.
Yeah.
And I ascribe to that. And I think for Black youth, I think that's a very powerful phrase for us, a very powerful affirmation. We deserve to and will reclaim our Black innocence, instinct and independence. And, I think as a future word, continue to challenge representations that we see, continue to resist. The socially dominant narrative and systemic oppression, continue to question the social, political and social economic significance of these events. So that's my word to you. We've got this. We're amazing. We're dominating shit. They don't want to admit it, but we are. And that's that, really. In terms of where you can find the podcast To Be Confirmed, Spotify, Apple, you will find everything there. YouTube, you'll find it there. On Spotify and Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. Be honest, do what you want to do, but please leave us a lovely review because that my hair, okay, that gets more eyes and ears in the algorithm. YouTube, subscribe. To Be Confirmed, you'll find me just there. Again, TikTok and Instagram at _To Be Confirmed pod is where you will find me. Kadra has also shared her socials, but once we post everything, I will have everything ready for you to access. Also, let me know. I keep asking you guys, let me know who you want to see in the podcast. Let me know what topics you want to hear about. Because I'm intrigued. I want to hear more from you. I want to see what's on your mind, really. And finally, last month, I'm very grateful and proud to say that the podcast reached a year old. She's a baby. I know she's a year old. But yeah, significant milestone. And I don't care if I come across as overconfident, but I know that this podcast will be nationally and internationally renowned one day. And we are just getting started with it, really. So if you don't want to miss what's going on, stay on the ride. Again, Kadra and I have spoken about a lot today. If there's anything that you feel that we may have missed, any reflections, feelings, thoughts that come up when you watch this, let us know. But without further ado, we're going to go. So we'll see you at another time to be confirmed.
Hey, thank you for joining us on another episode of To Be Confirmed. I hope that you feel inspired, and please don't forget to like, share, comment, save and subscribe to the podcast. We'll be seeing you very, very soon with another episode at a date to be confirmed.
So we're going to have Francesco, the wonderful Francesco of Ruvlo Brothers UK and Chum Chat UK and amazing things. I'm an editor and producer. I'm really just giving you a whole bloody list. Anyways, we're going to get Francesco to explain to us the rules of this game we're going to play called Wavelength. Everyone say hello to Francesco.
Hello, hi. Hello, right. I forgot.
Hi.
I set up the cameras, don't even remember which one. That one. Okay, cool. We're going to play a nice game. It's called Wavelength. Okay, it's a good game. You learn about each other. It's very fun.
Yes.
So I'm going to think of a number.
Thank you.
And then you both are going to think of 3 questions.
Okay.
Taking turns.
Okay.
Category based. So for example, you'll say something like a YouTube channel. And then I'll give you a YouTube channel that I think is my number out of 10 on like a rating scale. Okay, I've got a number.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. Okay. Favorite flavor of ice cream.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go vanilla.
Okay.
Favorite town in the UK.
Your folks are looking at you like, you better make sure you're picking
Town
the right
city.
town.
Town or city? Blackpool.
Okay.
Oceans of the world.
These are the world. Let's say Atlantic.
Okay, is your answer 4?
Close. So you knew it was a low one.
I was thinking 2.
Yeah, 3. Yeah, 3.
Fuck!
Blackpool is horror. I'm sorry.
It is. I've been
I'm
there.
sorry.
No comment.
Yeah. Sorry,
No comment from Kadra. No comment from Kadra. Okay,
now
cool.
someone else. Yeah, one of you think a number.
Okay, cool. I'll think about it. I'm like, huh? This is, you know, the do.
Should I think of the number and you
like,
think of the categories this time?
yes, please. My brain is like,
Okay, I've got a number.
okay, cool. Category is font.
Font. Okay.
Yeah.
Arial.
Okay. Category is, that's powerful. Category is drinks. Do you want to use mine?
Pineapple juice.
Okay, cool. Category is snacks.
Blueberries.
Okay. Yeah,
Huh?
that's good.
I thought right.
I want to say 8.
Close.
Fuck.
7.
Yeah.
7. Yeah. So like just above average.
Wow. Okay.
Sweet.
Fair. You're gonna have so much fun putting this
Nah, horrible. The amount I have to
bloopers.
edit because Chantal did not understand the game is crazy.
You can put
But I
a couple
didn't
in though.
And if
It
you
was
like it, we'll play it again.
yes. If
And
you
you'll be a pro next time.
yes, I will be a pro. I will learn. I will study the game because I'm sorry, my brain's switched off now. I've done all the talking, my brain's switched off. But yes, if you enjoyed the game, please support Francesco. I do leave his handles on everything that we post. So drop him a follow, drop him a like, everything that's positive there. Thank you so much again for all of your support. You can see me, I'm relaxed now. I've done what I need to do. I can breathe. But whatever you decide to do with yourselves, please look after yourself. Please stay safe. And I will see you very soon at another time to be confirmed.
Bye. Bye.